Vivian Hale lost everything in one day. Her company, her marriage, her future. Her husband, the man she'd built a career for over 10 years, signed the divorce papers right there at the boardroom in front of the entire board of directors and walked out with his 26-year-old secretary. In the midnight Manhattan rain, homeless and penniless, Vivian knocks on the iron gates of a dark mansion, and the one who opens the door is none other than Luca Moretti, America's most powerful mafia boss. Like and comment with the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because tonight, it's only just beginning. The divorce papers had been prepared for 6 weeks before Vivian ever saw them. That was the part that kept circling back to her in those first numb hours afterward. Not the betrayal itself, not the 10 years she'd given to a man who apparently spent the last 2 of them planning her removal with the same cold precision he applied to hostile acquisitions. It was the timeline. 6 weeks. While she was flying to Singapore to close the Meridian deal that saved Cross Dynamics from a catastrophic liquidity shortfall, Adrian had been sitting across a mahogany table from a team of attorneys, methodically dismantling her life. While she was troubleshooting supply chain collapses at 3 in the morning, running on black coffee and adrenaline, her husband had already decided she was done. The meeting was called at 9 a.m., under the pretense of a board strategy session. Vivian had dressed carefully that morning, charcoal blazer, her good pearls, hair pulled back the way she always did when she needed to project authority. She'd arrived 7 minutes early, the way she always did. She'd poured herself water from the crystal pitcher at the center of the table, the way she always did. And when Adrian walked in wearing an expression she couldn't immediately name, something that lived between satisfaction and mild embarrassment, she'd assumed it was about the Hartwell deal falling apart. She'd been ready to fight for that too. Instead, a lawyer she'd never seen before slid a folder across the table. Vivian? Adrian had remained standing. That was the first tell she should have read. He always sat first in rooms where he held power. I think we both know this has been coming. She didn't open the folder immediately. She looked at him instead, really looked at him. The way you look at something when some animal part of your brain has already understood what your conscious mind is still refusing to process. He was wearing a tie she didn't recognize, navy with a thin gold stripe. She'd bought every tie in that man's wardrobe for the last 8 years, and she'd never seen that one before. What is this, Adrian? Not a question. She already knew. The firm is being restructured. He said it like it was a quarterly update. Your position is being eliminated, and given the nature of our personal situation, she said it back to him flat. We thought it would be cleaner to address both matters simultaneously. He finally sat, folded his hands, had the audacity to look tired. The board agrees the optics of keeping you on during the transition would be complicated. Vivian opened the folder. She read it slowly and thoroughly, the way she read every contract, every term sheet, every piece of paper that had ever been put in front of her in a decade of building Cross Dynamics from a struggling tech startup into a company worth $900 million. Her equity stake, gone, converted to a one-time settlement payout that represented less than 4% of what her shares were actually worth. Her seat on the board, eliminated. Her title, her office, her corporate email, all to be deactivated by close of business Friday. There was a non-disparagement clause. There was a non-compete covering the entire domestic logistics and tech sector for 36 months. There was a confidentiality agreement that, if she signed it, would prevent her from ever discussing the circumstances of her departure with anyone, including legal counsel, without prior written permission from Cross Dynamics attorneys. At the bottom of the last page, in the space marked for her signature, someone had helpfully printed her full name in light gray, Vivian Marie Hale, as if she might forget it. She closed the folder. She looked up at Adrian, at the lawyer, at the 2 junior board members seated along the wall who were both staring very hard at the middle distance. Who is she? Vivian said. Adrian's jaw tightened. That's not... Who is she, Adrian? A long pause. The lawyer shifted in his chair. One of the junior board members actually got up and walked to the window. Her name is Celia, Adrian said finally. She's the director of... I don't need her job title. Vivian stood. She buttoned her blazer. She picked up her water glass and drank what remained in it, unhurried, because her hands were not going to shake in this room. They were not going to shake. She set the glass back down on the coaster with a small, precise click. "I'll have my attorney review this," she said. "Vivian, the offer has a 72-hour window. After that, then I suggest you make sure your lines stay open." She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm. "And Adrian." She paused at the door, made herself look back at him one more time. He looked older than she'd ever noticed. Smaller, somehow, now that she was paying actual attention. "That tie doesn't fit you." She made it to the elevator before the shaking started. She made it to the lobby before the first tear came. She made it outside, into the gray October morning with its smell of exhaust and rain moving in from the west, before she stopped walking and stood on the sidewalk in front of the Cross Dynamics building, the building she had personally negotiated the lease for 11 years ago when it was just her and Adrian and 2 borrowed laptops in a sublet in Brooklyn, and allowed herself exactly 45 seconds of it. Then she stopped, wiped her face with the back of her wrist, started walking. She had nowhere to go. The apartment was Adrian's. She'd been the one to find it, to negotiate the price, to supervise the renovation. Every detail of that space had passed through her hands. But the deed was in his name because they'd been about to get married, and at the time it had seemed like a distinction without a difference. She had her clothes there, her files, her books, a shelf of photographs. She had a hotel stay once for a conference. She had the office, and now she didn't. She walked for a long time. The rain started around noon, slow and indifferent at first, then steadier, and she hadn't brought an umbrella because she'd expected to be in a building all day. She kept walking anyway. Through Midtown, down into the West 30s, east, and then south without any real destination, just motion. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling the full weight of what had happened pressing down on her chest like concrete. By 7 in the evening, she was somewhere in the West Village. She was soaked through. Her good blazer was ruined. Her heels had raised blisters on both feet, and she'd stopped feeling the cold 20 minutes ago, which she understood was a bad sign but couldn't bring herself to care about yet. She took out her phone and looked at it. Battery at 6%. She had 12 missed calls. 3 from her personal attorney, 2 from her closest friend Danielle, 7 from a number she didn't recognize. She'd also been locked out of her Cross Dynamics email, she discovered, when she'd tried to log in an hour ago. They hadn't waited until Friday. She thought about calling Danielle. Danielle would let her stay, would pour wine, would say all the right things, and Vivian would have to sit there being comforted, and at this precise moment she was not ready for that. She was still in the part where she needed to be somewhere that felt like forward momentum, even if forward momentum was just wet feet and a dead phone moving through rain. A notification from her banking app loaded before the screen dimmed. She stared at it. Adrian had moved fast. The joint account, the account that had her quarterly living expenses in it, her personal emergency fund, everything that wasn't tied up in the equity he'd already seized, showed a balance of $412. He'd swept it this morning. While she was sitting in that boardroom reading what he'd done to her professionally, his attorneys had already been at the bank. Vivian stood in the rain and looked at $412 and felt something shift inside her. Not break. She was very careful to notice the distinction. Not break, shift, like a door swinging on a hinge, moving from one position to another, and what was on the other side of it was something colder and quieter and considerably more dangerous than grief. She was still standing there when the phone died. The rain got heavier around 8. She was somewhere she didn't immediately recognize. She'd turned a wrong corner somewhere, and the streets had gotten narrower, residential, lined with brownstones and high iron gates, and the occasional lighted window throwing warm yellow onto wet pavement. She was shivering now in earnest. Her feet had progressed from blistered to genuinely painful. She needed to get inside, call someone, find somewhere to be that wasn't a sidewalk in a downpour. There was a building at the end of the block, large, set back from the street behind a tall gate, not a brownstone but something older and more substantial, lights on inside on the ground floor. She could see them flickering through the curtained windows. There was an intercom panel beside the gate with a single button. She looked at it. It was the kind of desperation that strips away everything you think you know about yourself, that takes the version of you who has a plan and a position and a reputation and reduces you to just the bare animal fact of cold and wet and need. Vivian Hale, who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts and stared down hostile boards and built a company with her own bloodied hands, pressed the button on a stranger's gate because she needed to get out of the rain. It buzzed once, twice. Yes, a man's voice, low, flat, carrying the specific quality of someone unaccustomed to being disturbed. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know this is... I'm sorry to bother you. I'm having a difficult night and my phone died and I just need to use a phone for a minute if that's possible. I can stay at the gate. I'm not..." She stopped, breathed. "I'm not dangerous. I'm just very wet." A long pause. She was about to step back, apologize again, move on, when something clicked and the gate began to swing inward. She almost didn't go in. There was a moment, standing in the rain looking at that opening, when every rational instinct said this was stupid and possibly unsafe, and she should find a coffee shop or a bar or anything else. But rational instinct had been running the show for a decade, and rational instinct had ended with $412 and a ruined blazer, so she walked through the gate. The man who opened the front door was not what she was expecting. She'd been vaguely picturing an older resident, someone's grandfather maybe, or a distracted academic type, someone non-threatening who would take pity on a soaked woman at the gate and feel good about themselves for helping. This man was neither old nor soft. He was somewhere in his early 40s, tall, the kind of lean that came from discipline rather than genetics, dressed in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm despite the hour, dark hair, a few days of gray at the temples that he clearly wasn't concerned about, a face that might have been handsome once and was now something more interesting than that, angular, marked by some private erosion that had nothing to do with age. He looked at her the way you look at something unexpected, not threatening, just assessing, taking in information. "Come inside," he said. "I really just need to..." "You're going to get sick standing there." He said it without inflection, like it was an observation about weather rather than an expression of concern. He stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside." She came inside. The entry was large, stone floor, a coat rack along one wall. It smelled like wood smoke and something else she couldn't immediately identify. Cedar, maybe, and the faint ghost of cigarettes that had been smoked somewhere else in the building hours ago. Not what she'd pictured from outside. More lived in, more functional. There was a stack of what looked like shipping manifests on the entry table, held down by a heavy glass paperweight. "Phone's in the study," the man said, already walking. He had the unhurried movement of someone who never needed to rush because things arranged themselves according to his expectations. "You can dry off while you make your call. There are towels in the hall closet, left side." She stood there for a second. "You don't know me." He paused without turning around. "No. Most people don't let strangers in." "Most people," he said, and resumed walking. His name was on a piece of correspondence she saw on the study desk while she was dialing Danielle. A single sheet, no letterhead, but with a name at the top of the address block, L. Moretti. She didn't think anything of it. She was focused on getting the call out, on hearing Danielle's voice, on figuring out the immediate logistics of her survival. Danielle answered on the second ring, alarmed at the unknown number, more alarmed at the sound of Vivian's voice, and within 5 minutes had confirmed she'd be at the address Vivian gave her within the hour. Vivian thanked her, hung up, sat in the chair beside the desk for a moment with her eyes closed, and tried to organize her thoughts. The man, Moretti, appeared in the doorway with a mug of something hot. He set it on the desk edge without asking if she wanted it. Tea. No bag, no label, clearly loose leaf, steeped dark. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for letting me in." He sat in the chair across from her, not close, not looming, just sitting in his own space in his own house with the particular stillness of someone who was comfortable in silence. "What happened to you?" he said. It was the same flat tone, not soft, but not unkind either. The way a person asks a question when they actually want the information, rather than just performing sympathy. She thought about deflecting. She was a private person. She'd spent her career maintaining a careful wall between what she showed in rooms and what she actually felt. But she was wet and exhausted and still shaking slightly, and her phone had been dead and her bank account had $412 in it, and this man had opened his gate and his door and made her tea, and sometimes the wall just comes down. She told him, not everything, but enough. The board meeting, the papers, the account, the 10 years. She kept her voice even. She was doing all right until she got to the part about the tie, the navy tie with the gold stripe, and something in her face must have shifted because the man across from her watched her with a focus that felt different from sympathy, more like calculation, like he was filing things in real time. When she finished, she realized she'd been staring at the desk. She looked up. He was still watching her. You built it, he said. The company. I built most of it. And he took your equity. He had a better legal team. That's not the same as a valid claim. She looked at him more carefully. No, it's not. A pause. He reached out and turned the letter on the desk face down, a small, unhurried gesture. What did you do? At the company. Specifically. She blinked. Excuse me? Your role. What did you actually do? She stared at him. She was trying to figure out if she was being patronized or interrogated or something else entirely. His expression gave her nothing, just that focused attention, waiting. Supply chain architecture, she said finally. International logistics networks. I restructured their entire routing system in 2019, saved them $11 million in overhead. I designed their Asia-Pacific distribution model from scratch. I identified the Meridian acquisition target, negotiated the terms, closed the deal in Singapore last month. She paused. I ran the company, Mr. Moretti. Adrian handled the public face. I ran the company. Something changed in his expression. Barely. Just a slight adjustment around the eyes, like a door opening by an inch. He nodded once, very slowly. I know cross dynamics, he said. She frowned. How? He looked at her steadily. Because cross dynamics is about to merge with Titan Nexus. The name landed with a weight she hadn't expected. She knew Titan Nexus. Everyone in her sector knew Titan Nexus. A multi-industry conglomerate with shipping and infrastructure holdings across 4 continents, currently under informal federal scrutiny for antitrust concerns that somehow kept getting quietly shelved. The rumored merger had been floating around industry circles for months, always denied, never confirmed. That deal isn't public, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. The room felt different than it had a moment ago. She could hear the rain against the windows, steadier now, and her tea had stopped steaming, and the man across from her was watching her with an attention that she was only just beginning to understand was not casual. Who are you? She said. He considered the question for a moment. He didn't look away. He had the eyes of someone who'd spent a long time being honest about difficult things, because dishonesty required more maintenance than he was willing to invest. Luca Moretti, he said. I own several things. Shipping infrastructure, primarily. Some real estate. Various interests. Various interests, she repeated. Yes. She looked around the room again. The shipping manifests in the entry, the correspondence on the desk, the quality of the silence in this house, a silence that had weight to it, that felt like people being careful rather than simply absent. The gate and the stone floor and the way he'd moved to the door without consulting anyone, without checking, without any of the small tells that said a person lived with the ordinary uncertainty of not being in control. She looked back at him. You knew the merger details, she said slowly. A merger that isn't public. And you know the companies involved by name. Yes? That's not a coincidence. No, Luca Moretti said. It isn't. Her heart was beating faster. She was cold, but she was also... And she recognized this sensation because she'd felt it every time a deal started revealing its actual shape. She was alert, sharply, electrically alert. What do you actually do, Mr. Moretti? He held her gaze. Outside, the rain was coming down hard and steady, and somewhere in the distance a car alarm wailed and cut off, and Danielle was 30 minutes away, and the man across from her was making a decision. I think, he said finally, that is a conversation for a different night. He stood. Your ride will be here soon. You should eat something before you go. He moved toward the door. There's food in the kitchen. You're welcome to it. She watched him go. She should have left it there, should have eaten something, waited for Danielle, gone to a hotel, started making calls to lawyers in the morning, should have treated this as the strange, dislocating footnote it technically was, the night she knocked on the wrong door and a man with shipping manifests on his entry table made her tea and left her alone in his study. But she sat in the chair for another minute after he left, and her eyes went back to the desk, and the letter he'd turned face down. She reached out, turned it back over. The letterhead, now that she was looking, was not company letterhead. It was personal stationery, the kind used for certain types of correspondence that weren't meant for official channels. At the top, in small clean type, Moretti Group. Below it, an address in a building she recognized because she'd once analyzed the commercial real estate holdings of everyone with a stake in the West Coast port authorities. She put the letter back, face down, the way he'd left it. She sat very still for a moment. Then she thought about Adrian sitting in their apartment tonight, his apartment, with Celia from wherever she worked, probably drinking the wine from the cellar that Vivian had curated over 3 years, celebrating a victory that he had built entirely from what she built first. She thought about the navy tie with the gold stripe. She thought about 6 weeks of preparation while she was in Singapore closing a deal for him. She thought about $412. She stood up, walked to the kitchen door. Luca Moretti was standing at the counter with his back to her, doing something with a pan on the stove, and he didn't turn around when she came in, but she could tell from the slight shift in his posture that he knew she was there. "The Titan Nexus merger," she said. "What happens if it goes through?" A pause. He turned the heat down under the pan. "Bad things," he said, "for a significant number of people. And if it doesn't?" He turned then, looked at her across the kitchen. He looked less like a man who'd done her a quiet favor and more like a man who'd been waiting to see if she'd ask the right question. "Also interesting," he said. She crossed her arms. Her blazer was still damp. Her feet still hurt. She had no phone, no money worth speaking of, no home, and she was standing in a kitchen with a man she'd known for less than 2 hours, who knew things about her industry that he shouldn't know, and moved through his own house like the rooms cleared a path for him. Every sensible instinct she had said to wait for Danielle and walk away from this door the same way she'd walked through it, as someone passing through, not staying. But there was something else. Something underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the cold that she hadn't felt in a very long time. A sharpening. A sense of gears beginning to turn. "I want to hear it," she said. "Whatever you were going to say, whatever this actually is." Luca Moretti looked at her for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. "I'll explain it. And then you can decide if you want to leave." She sat. He turned back to the stove. Outside the kitchen window, the rain came down without mercy, and somewhere across the city, Adrian Cross was celebrating what he thought was the end of Vivian Hale. He was wrong about that. But neither of them knew yet exactly how wrong, or what it was going to cost him and what it was going to cost her, and what would have to burn before anything new could rise from what was left. Luca set 2 plates on the counter and began to talk. He told her about Titan Nexus the way a surgeon describes a tumor. Clinical, precise, no wasted sentiment. Vivian sat at the kitchen counter with her hands wrapped around a plate she wasn't eating from and listened. Luca stood on the other side, not pacing, not gesturing, just talking in that flat, steady voice that made everything he said feel like weather. Inevitable, already arrived, simply a matter of how prepared you were for it. Titan Nexus had started as a regional shipping company out of Houston in the 90s. By 2008, it had absorbed 3 mid-size port operators on the Gulf Coast. By 2015, through a series of acquisitions that looked legitimate from the outside and were something considerably different from the inside, it had established controlling interests in 14 major freight hubs across North America and Southeast Asia. On paper, it was an infrastructure conglomerate. In practice, it was the financial backbone of 4 separate criminal networks that used its logistics channels to move money, goods, and people across borders with the kind of efficiency that only comes from owning the infrastructure itself. "How do you know this?" Vivian said. "Because I used to own part of it." She set her fork down. "Not the criminal side," he said, reading her expression. "The legitimate side. I had equity in the original Houston operation. I helped finance 2 of the early acquisitions." He paused. In 2017, Victor Blackwell, took control of the board. He restructured the ownership in a way that was creative. My equity was reclassified. Assets I'd built into the company were absorbed into holding structures I had no visibility into. By the time I understood what had happened, the legal unwinding would have cost more than the stake was worth and drawn attention I wasn't willing to invite. He stole from you. He did more than that. Luca's jaw tightened slightly. It was the first crack in the surface she'd seen. 3 people who worked for me, who had worked for me for years, were killed in the 8 months following Blackwell's restructuring. The official findings were accidents. 2 car crashes and a fire. He picked up his glass, didn't drink from it, set it back down. Victor Blackwell sent me a condolence card for each one. The kitchen was very quiet. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm against the window. And now he's merging with cross dynamics, Vivian said. He's using cross dynamics, Luca said. The merger gives Titan Nexus access to Adrian's routing infrastructure, which, as I understand it, is significantly more sophisticated than what Adrian built. She felt the implication land. What I built? Yes. So he's using my work. She said it slowly, feeling the shape of it. He's using your work to expand a network that moves narcotics and trafficking proceeds through legitimate freight channels. Luca's voice didn't change. He wasn't performing outrage. He was just telling her what was true. Once the merger completes, the combined infrastructure will be large enough and legally complex enough that federal investigators would need years to untangle it, by which point Blackwell will have restructured again, and the people at the top will be insulated. Vivian sat with that for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you asked." "That's not a sufficient answer." He looked at her across the kitchen. In the overhead light, she could see the lines around his eyes more clearly. Not the lines of someone who smiled often, but the deeper kind, the ones that came from sustained watchfulness, from spending years in rooms where you couldn't afford to be wrong. "I'm telling you," he said, "because Adrian Cross is about to make your work into something criminal, and because the thing that stops that from happening requires someone who understands the architecture of what he's selling." He paused. "I know shipping. I know criminal finance. I do not know the internal logistics systems of Cross Dynamics well enough to do what needs to be done quickly." "What needs to be done?" "Titan Nexus has to lose the merger, cleanly, publicly, in a way that damages both entities enough that neither can recover the deal under a different structure." He finally ate something from his own plate, unhurried, like they were discussing a quarterly report. "That requires someone who can operate in the boardrooms I can't enter. Someone with enough institutional credibility to be taken seriously and enough industry knowledge to be dangerous." Vivian looked at him. "You want to use me," she said. "I want to offer you something," he said. "Whether you use it, or I use it, or we both use it is a conversation." "What are you offering?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Adrian's debt. His company's debt, specifically. The leveraged positions he took to finance the last 18 months of expansion. I've been acquiring it quietly for some time. I currently hold enough to trigger a covenant default if I choose to." He watched her process that. "I'm also in a position to accelerate certain regulatory inquiries that have been moving slowly, and I have relationships with 3 of Adrian's largest institutional investors that he is not aware of." She stared at him. "You've been building a position against Cross Dynamics," she said, "before I ever knocked on your gate." "Yes." "For how long?" 14 months. She stood up from the counter. She didn't know exactly why. Some physical need to change the geometry of the room, to be upright, to feel the ground under her feet. She walked to the window and looked out at the rain and the dark street and the gate swinging slightly in the wind. "You need a face," she said. "Someone who can stand in front of a board and be taken seriously. Someone who can move in the legitimate business world while you move in whatever world you actually move in." She turned around. "That's what this is?" "That's part of it." "What's the other part?" "Phoenix Holdings," he said. "I've been building it parallel to the Cross Dynamics position. A clean corporate structure, legitimate holdings in shipping, real estate, and logistics technology. It needs a CEO." He held her gaze. Someone who actually knows how to run it. The front buzzer sounded. Danielle, 40 minutes early because she'd driven instead of taking a car. Vivian looked at the intercom and didn't move for a second. If I leave tonight, she said, and I don't come back, then I find another way, Luca said. Slower, more expensive. And the merger goes through. Probably. She pressed the buzzer to let Danielle in. She turned back to look at Luca Moretti, who was clearing the plates from the counter with the same unhurried precision he applied to everything else, and she thought about her work, her routing systems, her distribution architecture, her Asia-Pacific model, carrying Titan Nexus's freight, carrying Blackwell's money, moving through ports she'd spent years mapping, along channels she'd designed, doing what she'd built them to do, but for something that would make her sick to her core if she let herself think about it long enough. I'll come back tomorrow, she said, and we're going to be very clear about what I'm agreeing to and what I'm not. Luca nodded once. He didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man whose calculation had come out the way he'd expected, which was somehow more unsettling than gratitude would have been. Danielle appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopped, took in the room, the two plates, the man at the counter, Vivian's ruined blazer and red-rimmed eyes, and composed her expression in about 2 seconds with the talent of someone who had been Vivian's friend for 15 years. I'm Danielle, she said, directing it at Luca. Luca, he said. He dried his hands on a towel, set it on the counter, and walked out of the kitchen without further conversation. Danielle looked at Vivian. I need a shower and 6 hours of sleep, Vivian said. I'll explain in the car. She explained approximately 30% of it in the car, enough to give Danielle the shape of things without the parts that she needed to sit with longer before saying out loud. Danielle listened the way she always listened, completely still, no interruptions, her eyes on the road. When Vivian finished, there was a silence that lasted approximately 4 blocks. He's connected, Danielle said finally. Not a question. Yes. To what? I don't know the full picture yet. Viv. I know. You know, and you're going back tomorrow. He knows things that no one outside of a very specific world would know, Danny, about the merger, about Blackwell, about the debt positions. He's been building something for over a year, and what Adrian is about to sell, what Blackwell is about to get access to, is mine. I built it. I'm not going to watch it become someone's money laundry because I was too cautious to sit across a table from the man who's trying to stop it. Danielle was quiet again. Are you doing this because it's the right thing or because you're furious? Both, Vivian said. Does it matter? Danielle pulled up in front of her building and put the car in park. Be careful, she said. And I mean that in every possible sense. She came back the next morning at 9:30. Luca was in the same study, at the desk, in a different dark shirt with the sleeves already rolled. There was coffee. He didn't say good morning. He pushed a folder across the desk. Phoenix Holdings corporate structure, he said. Review it. She reviewed it for 45 minutes. She asked 11 questions. He answered 10 of them directly, and the 11th, about the origin of the capitalization, he answered with enough precision to satisfy her professional requirements while leaving the full picture deliberately incomplete. She noted the incomplete picture and kept going. The board is currently 3 people, she said, all of whom I assume are yours. You'll have final authority on operational decisions. Final authority isn't the same as sole authority. No, but it means you can't be overruled on the things that matter. Define the things that matter. Anything that touches legitimate business operations, regulatory compliance, or public-facing corporate conduct. He paused. The other side of the ledger is mine. You don't touch it. You don't ask about it. And if anyone asks you about it, you have no knowledge of it. She looked at him steadily. And if what's on your side of the ledger creates exposure for Phoenix, it won't? That's not a guarantee. No, it's a statement of intent. He met her gaze. I have spent 20 years not letting my interests contaminate structures I want to keep clean. That is not something I do carelessly. She thought about this. I need full control of hiring. I will not have you placing people in my organization. Agreed. I need independent legal counsel, not connected to you in any way I can trace. Also agreed. And I need to know, before I sign anything, what the actual play is. Not the outline, the specific sequence. What we're doing, when, how, and what the exit looks like. Luca leaned back in his chair. It was the first time she'd seen him change his posture in any substantial way. He looked at her with that same filing expression, and she had the distinct sense that he was revising something. Most people, he said, don't ask for the exit in the first meeting. Most people, she said, aren't me. He told her the sequence, all of it, or enough that she could extrapolate the rest. Phoenix Holdings would acquire Adrian's debt through a series of secondary market purchases that were already in progress. Simultaneously, Phoenix would establish a public profile in the shipping and logistics sector, press, partnerships, a visible track record that would position Vivian as a credible industry player. When the Titan Nexus merger was announced formally, Phoenix would be positioned to challenge it on both regulatory and financial grounds, with Vivian as the public face and Luca's network providing the intelligence and leverage that would never appear in any official document. The end state, the merger collapses. Adrian's company, stripped of its crown asset, becomes insolvent. Titan Nexus loses its primary acquisition target at a critical moment in its expansion timeline. Victor Blackwell absorbs the damage without the ability to recover it cleanly. And Cross Dynamics assets, Vivian said, when Adrian's company fails. Liquidated at auction, Phoenix will be positioned to acquire the routing infrastructure and logistics technology. He watched her. Your work comes back to you. She sat with that for a moment. There was something in it that felt like justice, and something in it that felt like bait, and she wasn't certain yet which one was larger. She signed the preliminary agreement 3 days later. She spent those 3 days reading everything she could find about Phoenix Holdings, about Luca Moretti's legitimate business history, about Victor Blackwell and Titan Nexus. She had her personal attorney, not the one she'd used at Cross Dynamics, a different one, a woman named Hargrove who specialized in corporate litigation and had a reputation for being difficult in all the right ways. Review the documents. Hargrove called her at 11 at night after the review. The structure is clean, Hargrove said, unusually clean. Whatever else this man is, his lawyers are exceptional. But the holding company at the top of his personal ownership structure is registered in a jurisdiction I can't get full disclosure on, which means there is a portion of the overall entity that I cannot verify. A pause. Whoever he is outside of what's on paper, he is very careful about keeping it separate. I know, Vivian said. And you're signing anyway. I'm signing the Phoenix Holdings operating agreement. I'm not signing anything that touches whatever else there is. That distinction may not protect you if things go wrong. I know that too. She signed. She moved into the Phoenix Holdings offices, a floor in a building in Tribeca that was professionally furnished, legitimately leased, thoroughly unremarkable, 2 weeks after the night she'd knocked on the wrong gate. She had a team of 7 within a month, all hired by her, all vetted by Hargrove's firm. She had a corporate identity, a communication strategy, and a pipeline of legitimate deals that Luca's network had positioned her to access. She also had Luca. He was not in the offices. He was never in the offices, but he was present in the ways that mattered, in the intelligence that arrived via encrypted message at precise intervals, in the institutional investors whose positions shifted in ways that benefited Phoenix, in the regulatory conversations that appeared to be moving on their own momentum but were clearly being steered from somewhere she couldn't see. He was the current under the water. She was the surface. They met twice a week, always at the house, always in the evening. She'd come in through the gate. She had a code now, a 4-digit sequence he'd given her without ceremony, and they'd sit in the study or the kitchen or occasionally on the back terrace when the weather allowed, and they'd debrief. She'd report on what was moving in the visible world. He'd update her on what was moving beneath it. She learned to read him in those sessions. Not to understand him. She doubted anyone fully understood Luca Moretti, possibly including himself. But to read him, the way you learn to read a complicated piece of machinery. The slight tension in his jaw that meant something had shifted in a direction he hadn't expected. The way he'd set his coffee cup down with a fraction more force than necessary when someone had done something that he found genuinely offensive. the longer silences when he was calculating rather than simply thinking. He was also, she discovered, watching her. Not the way she'd initially assumed. Not with the assessing coldness of someone monitoring a tool for signs of wear. Something more like attention, specific interest. She caught it occasionally in the study when she was making a point about a regulatory approach or walking through an acquisition structure, and she'd glance up and find him watching her with an expression she hadn't cataloged yet. It was brief. He'd redirect. But it was there. She didn't examine it too closely. There was too much else to examine. 6 weeks in, Adrian noticed Phoenix Holdings. She knew because Danielle texted her at 8 in the morning. He's asking around about your new company. She was in a meeting and she read the text under the table and felt something cold and clean move through her chest. Good. Let him ask. 2 days after that, her office received a legal letter from Cross Dynamics attorneys. It cited the non-compete clause in her separation agreement and alleged that Phoenix Holdings' shipping and logistics focus constituted a violation. The letter demanded she cease operations and submit to an audit of Phoenix's client roster. She forwarded it to Hargrove. Hargrove called back in 3 hours. The non-compete is enforceable in theory. In practice, Cross Dynamics would need to demonstrate competitive harm. Given that Phoenix hasn't yet directly competed for any of the same contracts, it would be a difficult case. She paused. But if Adrian can get an injunction, even a temporary one, it stalls your operation during a critical window. How do we stop that? Countersuit, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment, potential fraud claims related to the valuation used in your equity settlement. Hargrove's voice was level. She'd clearly been waiting for this. It won't be pretty. It becomes public. Your name, his name, the separation, all of it goes into the record. File it, Vivian said. She called Luca from the car on the way back from Hargrove's office. He picked up on the second ring, which she'd learned was his standard. Never the first, never the third. Adrian's moving against Phoenix, she said. I know. He'd known before she had, of course. It changes the timeline. We need to accelerate the debt acquisition. I'm moving 2 tranches that were planned for Q1 into this month. That's aggressive. He's given us the reason to be aggressive. A pause. Are you prepared for this to become visible? Your name in the filing, the countersuit, the press that follows. She looked out the car window at the city, the morning traffic, the storefronts, the ordinary machinery of ordinary people going through an ordinary day. She thought about 10 years, about Singapore, about the Navy tie. I'm prepared, she said. The filing hit the following Monday. By Tuesday morning, it was in 3 business publications. By Wednesday, it was in the general press, framed as a bitter divorce and corporate warfare story, the kind of thing that generated clicks because it had a sympathetic protagonist and a clear villain and money. Adrian's PR firm responded with a statement calling the claims baseless and retaliatory. Vivian's communications director, her hire, her choice, responded with 3 sentences that contained 2 verified facts and 0 emotion. She let the facts do the work. What neither Adrian nor the press knew was that Monday, the same day the filing hit, Luca's network completed the acquisition of the largest single tranche of Cross Dynamics' outstanding debt. Phoenix Holdings now had a position in Adrian's company that gave Luca effective leverage over its covenant structure. One missed benchmark, one, and he could call the debt. The company would scramble. The merger would become significantly more complicated. Adrian didn't know. Victor Blackwell's team didn't know. The investors didn't know. The only people who knew were in that Tribeca office and in a study in the West Village, and the silence around that knowledge felt like pressure building in a sealed space. She was in the office late on a Thursday. 3 months into it now, the lawsuit and discovery, the press simmering, Phoenix's legitimate business growing fast enough to be credible, when one of the encrypted messages came through on the secondary device Luca had given her. She almost didn't read it immediately. She was in the middle of a term sheet, but something made her stop. She picked up the device. The message was short. One of her new hires, a logistics analyst she'd brought on 5 weeks ago, a man named Daniel Reeves who came with impeccable references and a very good instinct for freight routing, had been identified through channels she didn't have to ask about as a former Titan Nexus employee. not from his public resume. The resume listed a different company for that period, a small consultancy that did not, upon investigation, appear to have actually existed. Daniel Reeves was embedded in her organization. Victor Blackwell knew about Phoenix Holdings, possibly about its connection to Luca, possibly more. She sat in the office for a long time after reading that. The building was quiet. She could hear the HVAC and her own breathing and nothing else. She thought about how many conversations Daniel Reeves had been present for, how many meetings, what he would have been able to pass back and when, and whether Blackwell already knew enough to preempt what they were building. She called Luca. It went to voicemail. Unusual. First time it had happened. She left nothing, just disconnected, which was the protocol they'd established for urgency. He called back 11 minutes later. "Reeves," she said, "I know. How long have you known?" A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. "A week." She went very still. "You knew for a week and didn't tell me." "I was confirming the scope. I needed to know what he'd had access to before." "He's in my organization, Luca." Her voice was flat. She was very deliberately keeping it flat because the alternative was a volume she couldn't afford at 11 p.m. in a glass-walled office. "He's inside what I built, and you waited a week to tell me." The confirmation process required, "I don't care about the confirmation process. We have an agreement. My operations, my people, my information, that is my lane. You don't sit on intelligence about a breach in my lane for a week because you're running a parallel process you didn't tell me about." Silence on the line. "You're right," he said. It surprised her. She'd been braced for justification. "That was a failure of the arrangement," he said. "It won't happen again." She breathed out slowly. "What do we know about the scope?" "Reeves has been reporting on Phoenix's client acquisition and the lawsuit. He doesn't appear to have connected Phoenix to me directly, but Blackwell knows the company is more than it looks. He's been trying to find the backing." "If he finds the backing." "He won't," Luca said. "Not through Reeves. I'm ending that access tonight." "Carefully," she said. "I want him removed in a way that doesn't signal we made him." "Agreed." Hargrove's office can be the mechanism. A documentation irregularity in his employment records that requires his immediate suspension pending verification. Clean, administrative, no implication of surveillance. She thought about that. It was a good play. Clean was right. "All right," she said. Then, "If Blackwell is already suspicious of Phoenix, the timeline for the summit announcement matters more than we thought. Once he identifies the threat fully, he'll move to close the merger fast, before we're in a position to challenge it publicly." "I know," Luca said. "I've been accelerating." "Tell me where you are." He told her. The picture that emerged was more advanced than she'd realized. The debt position was complete. 2 of Adrian's board members had been quietly approached through intermediaries and were wavering, and Luca had activated a contact inside the regulatory body that was nominally reviewing the merger who was willing to slow-walk the approval process by a calculated number of weeks. It was an extraordinary operation. It was also, she realized, something that had been running at full speed for months, and she had been given the parts she needed to run Phoenix while the rest had been moving around her in the dark. She thought about the week he'd known about Reeves. She thought about the things she'd probably never know he knew. She got home at midnight. She sat in Danielle's spare room. She'd been there 3 months. She needed to find her own place. She kept not doing it because forward momentum felt easier than stopping long enough to build something new. And she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. She was in it now. Not contractually, not on paper. Those things had been true for months. In it in the way that mattered. Her name was in the press. Her hires had been compromised. Her operation was known to the enemy. And the only real protection she had was a man she trusted 80% of the time based on evidence and the other 20% based on something she was not ready to examine. Danielle knocked and opened the door. Saw Vivian's face. Sat down on the chair by the window without being asked. "Reeves was Blackwell's plant," Vivian said. "How bad?" "Could be worse. Probably not as clean as we hoped." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "Luca knew for a week before he told me." Danielle was quiet. "He had a reason," Vivian said. "It was even a decent reason. and he acknowledged it was wrong. But, but, I'm running an operation inside a larger operation, and I can only see my piece of it. And I knew that going in. I agreed to that. She dropped her hands. I just didn't understand what that would feel like from the inside. Danielle looked at her carefully. Do you want out? Vivian thought about it honestly. She let herself actually sit with the question, not the reflex answer, not the pride answer, the real one. She thought about Reeves in her meetings. She thought about Blackwell knowing Phoenix existed. She thought about Adrian, somewhere across the city, still not knowing what was coming. She thought about the night she'd pressed a buzzer on a gate in the rain because she had nowhere else to be. No, she said, but I'm changing the terms. The next morning she arrived at the house at 7:30, earlier than she'd ever come. The gate code worked. She let herself in, found Luca in the kitchen, evidently just finished with something. Phone on the counter, jacket over the chair, the controlled stillness of a man who'd been in motion all night and had stopped. He looked up when she came in, said nothing. New terms, she said. She sat at the counter and put her hands flat on it. Everything that touches Phoenix, everything, including confirmation processes, including surveillance of my personnel, including intelligence about threats to my operation, I hear it the same day you hear it, not after, same day. He looked at her. And I want a meeting with Victor Blackwell. The room changed. She felt it. A shift in the air, in his stillness, and something behind his eyes that wasn't quite alarm, but was adjacent to it. That's not part of the plan, he said. The plan assumed we'd stay invisible until the summit. We're not invisible anymore. Blackwell already knows Phoenix is a threat, which means we don't have the luxury of the long approach. We need to know what he knows and how he's planning to respond. She held his gaze. I can get a meeting. Industry conference in Chicago next week. He's on the speaker list. I can engineer an introduction through a mutual contact. Legitimate, clean, nothing that ties back to you. You'd be walking into a room with a man who had people killed. Her voice stayed level. I know. That's why I'm telling you, not asking you. She paused. I can handle a conversation, Luca. What I can't handle is being 2 steps behind because we're playing it safe. He was quiet for a long time, looking at her with that expression she still hadn't fully cataloged. If he makes you, he said finally, if he understands what you are to this operation, then we'll know that too, and we'll know it faster than we would otherwise. Another long silence. Outside, the city was starting its morning. Distant sirens, the low pressure of traffic, pigeons on the window ledge making their pointless complaints. Same day, Luca said. Any intelligence that touches Phoenix, you hear it same day. He picked up his coffee cup. And I'll have someone in Chicago the day of the conference. Not near you, not visible, but there. She nodded. The meeting with Blackwell, he said. Come back and tell me everything he says. Every word. Obviously. He nodded once. She reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup without asking. And he watched her do it, and neither of them said anything. And outside the morning came up gray and cold and full of everything that was still moving underground, building toward a surface that was closer now than either of them had planned for. She was going to Chicago. She was going to sit across a table from Victor Blackwell, the man who'd stolen from Luca Moretti and put 3 bodies in the ground to cover it, and she was going to smile and shake his hand and look him in the eye, and she was going to learn every single thing she could about what he knew and what he was planning before he ever realized what she was. And she was going to do it as Vivian Hale, CEO of Phoenix Holdings, not as someone's weapon, not as someone's wife, but as herself, with all the damage and the fury and the 10 years of competence that Adrian had tried to strip from her and hadn't quite managed to take. She drank her coffee. Luca stood at the counter across from her, watching the window. Neither of them spoke about the thing that was growing in the space between them, quiet and inconvenient and considerably more dangerous than anything Victor Blackwell had yet done. But it was there, and they both knew it. The Chicago conference was called the Global Logistics Summit, which was the kind of name that made it sound more important than it was, and simultaneously less important than the conversations that actually happened inside it. Vivian flew in on a Tuesday. She took a commercial flight, Economy Plus, because Phoenix Holdings was legitimate, and legitimacy meant not spending money on private aviation you hadn't earned yet. She checked into a mid-tier hotel 6 blocks from the venue, unpacked her single bag with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years living out of luggage in foreign cities, and sat on the edge of the bed for 10 minutes reviewing everything she knew about Victor Blackwell. 61 years old, born in Beaumont, Texas, the second son of a Port Authority administrator who died when Victor was 19. Degrees in finance and maritime law from schools that were good but not exceptional, which meant he'd built whatever he had through will rather than pedigree. 3 marriages, the most recent lasting 11 years, and apparently stable in the way that things were stable when both parties had too much to lose to renegotiate. A public profile that was carefully maintained, philanthropic, civic-minded, the kind of man who gave keynote addresses at industry conferences and was photographed at charity galas and had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal every 18 months about the future of global freight infrastructure. And underneath all of that, the 3 condolence cards. The creative restructuring, the bodies. The mutual contact was a freight consultant named Harlan Cho, who'd worked with both Phoenix and years earlier, a subsidiary of Titan Nexus. He owed Vivian a favor from a reference she'd provided during a contract dispute the previous year. She'd called in the favor 2 days ago, kept the ask small and specific. An introduction at the conference reception, nothing more. Harlan was the kind of man who didn't ask follow-up questions, which was exactly why she'd chosen him. She met Luca's person in the hotel lobby at 7 a.m. without acknowledging him. She spotted him in approximately 40 seconds. Late 40s, conference lanyard, a coffee cup he was holding with one hand while scrolling his phone with the other, positioned with a sightline to both the elevator bank and the front entrance. He was good. She walked past him without eye contact and took the stairs to the conference level. The reception was at 6 that evening. She wore the good navy dress, not the ruined blazer, something better, something she'd bought specifically for this because armor came in many forms, and she understood that presentation was part of the weapon. She arrived 20 minutes after the official start time, which put her inside the room after it had organized itself into its social clusters, after she could map the geography of who was talking to whom before committing to an approach. Victor Blackwell was in the far corner of the room, near the windows overlooking the river. He was surrounded by 4 people, but not trapped by them. The specific body language of a man who could exit any conversation he was in because people adjusted to him rather than the reverse. He was taller than his photograph suggested, silver-haired, a handshake smile, wide, immediate, reaching nowhere near his eyes. Harlan found her near the bar at 6:40 and walked her over with the particular energy of a man doing a favor he'd already decided not to think too hard about. "Victor, I want to introduce someone you should know. Vivian Hale. She's running Phoenix Holdings out of New York, doing very interesting things in the logistics tech space." Blackwell extended his hand. His grip was firm and lasted exactly the right amount of time, calibrated through years of practice. "Vivian Hale." He said her name like he was filing it. "Phoenix Holdings. You've been making some noise." "We're working on it," she said. She smiled in a way that gave him nothing. "The Cross Dynamics lawsuit," he said. No preamble, no pretense that he hadn't already researched her. "That's a messy situation. Less messy than it looks. Strong underlying claims. Adrian Cross is a difficult man to fight in court. I'm aware of his resources," she said. "I spent a decade helping him accumulate them." Something shifted in Blackwell's expression. Not surprise. She didn't think this man was surprised by much, something more like recalibration. He handed his glass to one of the people beside him without looking at them and gave her his full attention, which felt like being stepped into a brighter, less comfortable light. "What's Phoenix's focus?" he said. "Specifically." "Logistics infrastructure. We're targeting undervalued routing assets and rebuilding the operational architecture around them. There's a significant gap in the mid-market between the boutique operators and the major conglomerates. We're positioning in that gap." "Smart," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like an observation about a chess position. "What's your capitalization situation?" "Private," she said pleasantly, "as I'm sure you understand." A pause. He was looking at her with the specific attention of someone running calculations in real time. "Your backing," he said. Is it domestic? Primarily. Anyone I'd know? I doubt it, she said. We're not using names anyone would recognize. That's deliberate. He smiled again, the handshake smile. Modest backers. That's unusual for the ambitions you seem to have. The ambitions are mine, she said. The backers prefer to let them develop organically. They talked for 11 more minutes. She tracked every word of it, his and hers, the way she used to track negotiations in the room, not just the surface content, but the structure underneath, what he was trying to find, where he was probing versus where he was genuinely offering information. He mentioned the Titan Nexus merger twice in indirect terms, watching her each time to see if the name produced a reaction. She gave him a faint professional acknowledgement and nothing more. When they shook hands again at the end, his grip lasted half a second longer than the opening one. A tell. Small, but she caught it. She walked directly to the hotel bar afterward, ordered a sparkling water, sat at the far end, and spent 15 minutes reconstructing the conversation from memory before calling Luca. He knew who I was before Harlan introduced me, she said. He's been tracking Phoenix. He went straight to the lawsuit, straight to the capitalization question. He's looking for the backing. Did he show you anything? He mentioned the merger, twice. Indirect. Watching for my read. What did you give him? Nothing. Flat acknowledgement. So she turned the glass in her hands. He asked if my backers were domestic. Specifically, that's not a standard question in that context. He's narrowing the field. Yes, and he's doing it personally, not through staff. That means he thinks the threat is significant enough to handle himself. She paused. He's going to move the merger announcement forward. I could feel it in the room. He's not waiting for the standard timeline. I know. Luca's voice was flat. I received information this afternoon. The announcement is being moved to the Global Tech Summit. 4 weeks from now. She absorbed that. That's half the timeline we planned for. Yes. Can you be ready? A pause that went a half second longer than she wanted. The debt position is complete. The board contacts are in place. The regulatory obstruction is active. Another pause. The public component requires more preparation than 4 weeks allows under the original plan. Then we change the plan, she said. What does 4 weeks get us? He told her. And what he told her changed the shape of everything. The Global Tech Summit was not an industry conference. It was something larger. The annual gathering of the country's most significant business, technology, and financial leaders. 3 days in a Manhattan hotel so iconic, it was effectively a landmark. Attendance was invitation only, and the invitations were managed through a committee that Vivian could not have accessed 6 months ago. Phoenix Holdings now had 2 invitations. She came back from Chicago and sat across from Luca in the study, and for the first time since she'd signed the agreement, she felt the full scale of what he'd built around her. The invitations, the board contacts, the debt position, the regulatory interference, it was a coordinated structure of extraordinary precision, assembled over more than a year, and she was at the center of it in a way she had not fully understood until she looked at the 4-week countdown and realized that everything had been pointed at this moment from the beginning. You planned for the summit, she said. Specifically, from the start. I planned for a public confrontation at the moment of maximum visibility, he said. The summit was the most likely venue. You didn't tell me that. I told you enough to do what you needed to do. She looked at him. That's not the same thing. He held her gaze. No, it isn't. The 4 weeks were the most brutal of the entire operation. She was running Phoenix's legitimate business, which was growing, genuinely growing, with real clients and real revenue, while simultaneously preparing the confrontation that would define the company's public identity in a single night. She was in the office by 6 every morning and rarely out before 10 at night. She lost 4 pounds she didn't have to lose because she kept forgetting to eat. She had a bruise on her left wrist from where she'd walked into a file cabinet corner in the dark at 7 a.m. 3 weeks in and hadn't had time to think about it since. Luca noticed the bruise. He didn't mention it, but she caught his eyes go to it once, in the study, and then away. That was the kind of noticing he did. Specific, silent, filed somewhere she couldn't access. They were working closer now than they had been. The 4-week compression meant the twice-weekly meetings had become daily ones, sometimes twice daily, the encrypted messages running constant. She'd started to know the rhythms of his days, when he was reachable and when he wasn't, the particular clipped quality in his voice when something had gone wrong that he was already managing, the slightly longer sentences he used when he was thinking out loud versus reporting established facts. She caught herself reading him the way she used to read the markets, automatically, without deciding to, her brain just doing it because pattern recognition was what it did. And she caught herself, some nights in the car heading back to the apartment she'd finally rented in the third week, wondering what he made of her, whether she was still a function to him, whether she'd ever been only that. She stopped following that thought wherever it was going. She had 4 weeks and one night that had to go exactly right. The night of the summit arrived with the specific quality of a thing that has been moving toward you for so long that when it finally arrives, it doesn't feel like arrival so much as inevitability. She was in the suite at the Summit Hotel at 4 p.m., already dressed, already through the hair and the face and the careful architecture of looking precisely as formidable as she needed to look. The dress was not the navy one from Chicago. It was black, fitted, completely without ornamentation, the sartorial equivalent of a statement that needed no amplification. She stood at the window looking at the city. Luca knocked at 4:30 and came in when she opened the door, and for a moment she saw him see her. A flash of something in his expression before it settled back into that controlled stillness, gone before she could name it. "Ready," he said. Not a question. Yes. He was in a dark suit she hadn't seen before. He wore it the way he wore everything, without apparent attention, without vanity, as if clothes were simply the surface and what mattered was underneath. She noticed, not for the first time and with the same discipline of not examining it, that he was a man who occupied whatever room he entered completely. "When we walk in," he said, "Adrian will see you first. He'll come to you. His instinct will be to manage the situation before he understands it. Let him talk. Give him nothing. Wait for Blackwell to come to him. And when Blackwell comes, I'll be there." She nodded. She picked up her clutch from the desk. Her hands were steady. She noticed this, that her hands were steady, with something that felt like satisfaction. They took the elevator to the ballroom level together and didn't speak. She was aware of him beside her in the way she'd become aware of very few things in her life, with her whole body, not just her attention. She kept her eyes on the elevator doors. The ballroom was everything the summit's reputation suggested, and nothing more. A room so large and so deliberately prestigious that the intimidation was architectural. 300 people in evening wear, a string quartet in one corner that no one was listening to, the specific humidity of an overoccupied expensive room. Cameras, press, corporate, stationed at intervals along the perimeter. She saw Adrian in 40 seconds. He was near the center of the room, drink in hand, mid-laugh with 2 men she recognized as board members from his side of the merger. He looked well, comfortable. He had the relaxed bearing of a man who believed tonight was going to confirm everything he wanted. He saw her at approximately the 60-second mark. The drink stopped halfway to his mouth. The laugh died mid-breath. He stared at her across the ballroom floor with an expression that moved in rapid sequence through surprise, confusion, and something she could only describe as the look of a man who has just heard an unexpected sound in a house he believed was empty. Then he saw Luca, and the expression did something more interesting. The confusion collapsed. In its place came something she'd never seen on Adrian's face in 10 years, not in any boardroom, not in any negotiation, not in any of the 1,000 difficult moments they'd navigated together. It was fear. Clean, animal, immediate. He knew who Luca Moretti was. She hadn't known that he would. She hadn't known that the name would mean something to Adrian specifically. She'd assumed Luca's reputation existed in a world that Adrian's world only peripherally touched. But the fear on Adrian's face was not the fear of social embarrassment or business surprise. It was the fear of a man who has done something he knows he shouldn't have and has just watched the consequence of it walk through a ballroom door. She filed this. She would think about what it meant later. Right now she walked. They crossed the room together and she felt the effect of it. The cameras turning, the conversations stuttering, the subtle seismic adjustment of 300 people recalibrating to something unexpected. Luca walked without hurry and without acknowledgement of anyone, and the path opened in front of them the way paths opened for men who inhabited a particular kind of authority. She stopped 4 feet from Adrian. "Vivian," he said. Her name in his voice, which she'd heard thousands of times in 1,000 different tones, and now sounded like a man trying to find a foothold on ice. Adrian. She kept her voice pleasant. Professionally pleasant. The tone she'd used in rooms where losing your composure cost you everything. You look well. His eyes went to Luca, back to her, to Luca again. What is this? This is the Global Tech Summit, she said. I have an invitation. You're here with... He stopped, pressed his lips together, made himself look only at her. We have a non-compete, Vivian. Phoenix Holdings is a violation. The court will decide that. The lawsuit is ongoing, as you know. She tilted her head. I'm surprised you haven't settled. Hargrove says your discovery responses have been creative. A muscle moved in his jaw. I want to speak to you, privately. That's not possible tonight, she said. I have things to do. She moved before he could respond, angling toward the opposite end of the room, where 3 of Adrian's board members were clustered with the unmistakable anxiety of people who had just seen something they didn't understand and needed to discuss it. Luca stayed at her shoulder. The announcement was scheduled for 9 p.m. At 8:40, she found a position near the stage, visible, deliberate, positioned where the cameras would catch her without any effort on her part. She could see Adrian on the far side of the room. He was talking to someone on his phone with the intense privacy of a man having a conversation he didn't want observed. At 8:55, Luca put his hand briefly on her arm. Blackwell is moving toward the stage, he said quietly. He's going early. She turned. Victor Blackwell was crossing the room in a suit that was slightly better than everyone else's in the room, which was not an accident. He had a cluster of people with him. Assistants, she thought. The kind that existed to make a man look like the center of a moving system. He looked confident. He looked like a man who was about to do something he'd planned for years and was enjoying the fact that it was finally here. He looked, briefly, in her direction. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. He looked away first. She noted it. The lights dimmed slightly. Someone tapped the microphone. Adrian took the stage, and the room did what rooms did when powerful men stood at podiums. It quieted, oriented, waited. He was good at this. She'd always known he was good at this. The performance of substance. The delivery of information in a way that made it sound like vision. He welcomed the room. He referenced the industry. He thanked the summit committee. She watched him with the detachment of someone who had watched this man perform in 1,000 rooms and understood every technique because she'd helped him develop half of them. He was building to the merger announcement. She could feel the room building with him. She stepped to the microphone stand at the side of the stage. A summit coordinator appeared at her elbow, confused, and she said quietly, Phoenix Holdings has a registered statement for this announcement. I'm listed in the program as a respondent. She was not listed in the program, but she said it with such professional certainty that the coordinator checked her tablet twice and found the gap where the listing should have been and made the decision that letting Vivian continue was less disruptive than stopping her. She stepped up to the secondary microphone. Adrian saw her and his sentence broke apart mid-phrase. The room heard it. The abrupt stall, the missing word, and 300 people turned to find the source of the interruption. She didn't look at Adrian. She looked at the room. My name is Vivian Hale, she said. I'm the CEO of Phoenix Holdings. We have an announcement as well. She made the announcement in 4 minutes. Clean, specific, sourced to documentation that Phoenix's legal team had filed that afternoon in 3 jurisdictions. Phoenix Holdings' debt position in Cross Dynamics. The covenant trigger. The regulatory inquiry that was no longer moving slowly activated 2 days ago by a formal complaint that bore Phoenix's legal letterhead. The institutional investor letter, signed by 2 of Adrian's 4 largest shareholders, expressing lack of confidence in the merger structure and requesting an independent review. And then Luca stepped to the microphone beside her. He said 7 sentences. He didn't raise his voice. He named Victor Blackwell directly, named him and named Titan Nexus, and named the 2017 restructuring that had stolen billions from legitimate partners, and named 3 specific individuals who had died in the 8 months that followed. He spoke with the specific calm of a man who has waited a long time to say something out loud, and has rehearsed it until all the emotion has been replaced by precision. The room was absolutely silent. The cameras were running. Victor Blackwell's face, which Vivian was watching from the corner of her eye, went through its own sequence: composure, calculation, and then something that resolved into a cold and very specific fury. Adrian was standing at the main microphone with the expression of a man watching his house fall into a hole in the earth. The next 72 hours were what happened when a room full of journalists and executives witnessed a public ambush in real time and then had the rest of the night to process and distribute it. By midnight, the story was on 3 major business wire services. By morning, it was general press. By the afternoon of the following day, the merger was in formal regulatory review. Not the soft, slow-walking kind, but the actual kind, with document requests and council involvement and the specific institutional energy of an agency that had received very clear signals from very specific places that this was a priority matter. 2 of Adrian's board members resigned within 48 hours. The stock moved in the way that stocks moved when a company's future became genuinely uncertain. 3 institutional investors called for emergency review of their positions. It was working. It was working better and faster than she'd allowed herself to believe it would. She was in the Phoenix offices on the Thursday after the summit, running on 4 hours of sleep and the specific adrenaline that came from watching something you'd built do exactly what you'd built it to do, when Hargrove called. "I need you to come to my office," Hargrove said. "Not the phone." She went. Hargrove had a corner office in a building on Lex that she kept the way she kept everything, organized to the point of appearing sparse, nothing on the desk that wasn't relevant to whatever was currently in front of her. She was standing at the window when Vivian arrived, which meant she didn't want to be at the desk for this conversation. "I received something this morning," Hargrove said, "from an anonymous source. I've spent 4 hours verifying the components I can verify." She put a folder on the desk. Vivian looked at it. "Victor Blackwell's team," Hargrove said. "This came from his operation. He sent it to me specifically because he knows I represent you." Vivian opened the folder. Inside was a series of documents, financial records, wire transfers, dated correspondence. She read them slowly, the way she read everything, and as she read, she felt a cold that had nothing to do with the office temperature beginning to move through her from the outside in. The records documented a series of payments made between 14 and 20 months ago. Routing through 3 intermediary accounts before landing in a holding structure that she recognized, because she'd spent enough time studying the architecture of Luca's legitimate holdings to recognize its fingerprints as adjacent to Moretti Group. The payments were from Titan Nexus. She read the dates, she read the amounts, she read the correspondence, which was brief and professional and used language that was sufficiently indirect to be plausibly deniable in a courtroom, but was utterly clear to anyone who understood how these conversations worked. Luca Moretti had received payments from Victor Blackwell's organization 14 months ago. At the same time, he was, by his own account, building the operation that was designed to destroy Blackwell's merger. At the same time, he was, by his own account, motivated by the deaths of 3 people Blackwell had killed. She sat down in the chair in front of Hargrove's desk without being asked. "The verification," she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly impressed by this. "What have you been able to confirm?" "The intermediary accounts are real. The holding structure is real. Though it's the outer layer, I can't get inside it. The correspondence headers are consistent with Blackwell's documented communication style." Hargrove sat down across from her. Her expression was the expression of a lawyer delivering information she wishes she didn't have. "I can't confirm the transfers themselves hit the Moretti adjacent account, but I can confirm they left the Titan Nexus structure and went somewhere. It could be fabricated. Yes. Blackwell's team is certainly capable of fabricating it." Hargrove paused. "It could also be real. And the timing is what it is," Vivian said. She sat in the chair for a moment. 14 months ago. Blackwell, payments. At the exact moment, Luca claimed to be building a position against the man. While he was telling her about 3 people who died, while he was making tea and opening his gate and offering her a role in something he described as justice. She thought about the week he'd known about Reeves, about the things he'd said were on his side of the ledger that she wasn't supposed to touch, about the 20% of him she'd been holding back from trusting based on something she called instinct and was possibly something else. She thought about the conference in Chicago and Blackwell's specific question about domestic backers and the way he'd shaken her hand at the end with that extra half second. He hadn't been trying to identify the threat that night. He'd been checking on an asset. She stood up. "Don't do anything with this," she said to Hargrove. "Not yet. Nothing moves until I tell you." Hargrove looked at her carefully. "Vivian, if this is real, if it's real, I need to know before anyone else does, and I need to know from him." She picked up her bag. "Don't move on this, please." She walked out of the office and stood on the sidewalk, and the city moved around her. Taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary and different machinery of 10 million people going about their days. And she stood in the middle of it and felt the specific quality of a ground she'd thought was solid, revealing itself to have nothing underneath. She pulled out her phone and looked at it. She thought about calling Luca. She thought about what he would say. Calm, flat, that measured voice that could be honesty or performance, and she had not yet learned how to tell the difference with certainty. She thought about what she'd say back. She didn't call him. She walked 3 blocks north and hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the West Village house. And she sat in the back of the cab with her hands in her lap and looked at the city going by and tried to locate somewhere inside herself the thing that would tell her what was true. She'd signed documents. She'd put her name on a public stage. She'd given the cameras her face and her voice and her credibility in front of 300 witnesses at the most visible business event of the year. She had done all of that in the name of something Luca Moretti had told her was justice, was protection, was the right thing on the right side of a real line. If those payments were real, there was no right side. There was only his side, which was the only side there had ever been. And she had been the surface of it, the clean, credible, legally protected surface. While whatever was actually happening moved beneath her in water, she'd never been allowed to see. She thought about the night at the gate, the tea, the way he'd turned the letter face down. The cab stopped in front of the house. She paid. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk looking at the gate, and what she felt was not grief exactly, not the hot tearing thing she'd felt walking out of the Cross Dynamics building in the rain. It was colder than that. It was the specific kind of feeling that came from understanding that you had been, for the second time in your life, someone's very well-planned decision rather than someone's actual choice. She entered the code. The gate swung open. She let herself in through the front door. The house was quiet. It was mid-afternoon. The study would be empty. Luca was usually elsewhere at this hour. She walked to the study anyway because she needed somewhere to be that was specific, and the study was where she did her clearest thinking. She sat in her usual chair. On the desk was a piece of correspondence she hadn't seen before. She shouldn't have looked at it. She looked at it. It was brief. A single paragraph, the kind of communication she'd learned to read in this context. Indirect language that meant precise things to the people who understood the code. She read it 3 times. She understood it on the second reading, but she read it a 3rd time to be certain. It was a confirmation of an arrangement between Moretti Group and an entity she recognized from Blackwell's corporate structure. Not Titan Nexus directly, a subsidiary, 2 layers removed. The date was recent. Not 14 months ago. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. After the Chicago conference. After she'd sat in Blackwell's orbit for 11 minutes and reported every word back to Luca the same night. She set the paper down. She sat in the chair and looked at the wall and the shelves of books and the window with its view of the small private garden that she'd never been invited into and had never thought to question, and she let herself understand what she was looking at. She heard the front door. Luca's footsteps in the entry. Unhurried even, the step of a man who was always exactly where he expected to be. And then the study door opened, and he saw her. He stopped. He looked at the desk, at the paper, which she hadn't moved, back at her. Something shifted in his face. A rapid, controlled adjustment, the kind that someone less practiced at watching him would have missed entirely. Then the stillness came back. "Vivian," he said. "Sit down," she said. He didn't move for a moment. Then he came into the room and sat in his chair across the desk and looked at her with the focused attention she knew so well and which she was now, for the first time, genuinely afraid of. "Explain it," she said. "All of it, starting with Blackwell, starting with whatever the arrangement actually is." Her voice was level and cold, and she could feel her own heartbeat at the base of her throat. "And I will know if you're managing me instead of telling me the truth. So do not do that." Luca looked at the paper, looked at her. His jaw was tight, his hands on the arms of the chair, completely still. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "Then tell me what it is," she said, "because what it looks like is that you negotiated with the man you told me murdered your people, and you did it 3 weeks ago, and you did it while I was inside the operation you built around destroying him, and I deserve to know what I've actually been part of." The room was absolutely silent. Outside, a car passed. A pigeon hit the window glass and startled away. The afternoon light came through at a flat angle and lit the dust in the air between them. Luca Moretti looked at the woman across the desk and made a decision she could see him making, the gears of it visible in the set of his shoulders, and the long exhale that came out of him like something he'd been holding for longer than this conversation. He opened his mouth to speak, and his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed in a way she'd never seen it change before. Not the controlled adjustments she'd cataloged, not the brief tells she'd learned to read. Something genuine and immediate and close to alarm. He picked up, said nothing, listened for 6 seconds. Then he looked at her with an expression that reordered everything she'd been trying to understand in the last 45 minutes, because it was not the expression of a man who had been caught, or a man preparing a defense, or a man calculating the most efficient management of a difficult situation. It was the expression of a man who was terrified. "They have Danielle," he said. She was on her feet before she knew she'd moved. "What did you just say?" Luca was already standing, already moving to the window with the phone pressed to his ear, his body doing the thing she'd never seen it do before, losing its deliberate unhurriedness, snapping into something faster and more animal. He spoke in Italian for 30 seconds, short clipped sentences, then ended the call. "Blackwell's people took her 40 minutes ago," he said, "from her office building. They have her at a location in Red Hook. My contact just confirmed." Vivian's brain did the thing it did under extreme pressure. It went very cold and very fast and processed in parallel. Danielle had left for her office at 8 this morning. Danielle, who knew about Phoenix, who knew about Luca, who knew the general shape of things because Vivian had been living in her apartment for 3 months and some conversations were unavoidable. Danielle, who had said be careful in every possible sense, and who was now in Red Hook because Vivian had walked into a ballroom 4 days ago and blown the operation into public view before Blackwell had been contained. "This is because of the summit," she said. "Yes." "He couldn't get to me directly, so he took someone I—" She stopped, breathed. "What does he want?" "Phoenix Holdings, full transfer of ownership and assets, and your public statement retracting everything said at the summit, timed release tonight, or—" Luca's jaw tightened to the point of visible tension. "Or Danielle doesn't come back." The room tilted slightly. She put her hand on the desk, and it steadied. "How many people does he have there?" Luca looked at her, really looked at her. Not the assessing look, not the calculating look. Something more direct and considerably more urgent. "Vivian, how many people?" "My contact says 6. The location is a warehouse conversion. Commercial exterior, private ownership registered to a shell. Blackwell uses it for certain meetings. Can you get her out?" "I'm already moving people." He crossed to the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, removed something she couldn't see fully before he secured it at the back of his waistband with the practiced ease of someone doing something he'd done many times. "But I need you to stay here." "Absolutely not." "Vivian, she is there because of me." Her voice came out flat and hard, and entirely without room for negotiation. "I'm not sitting in this house while Danielle is in a warehouse in Red Hook because I made choices that put her in that room. Tell me what I need to do." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere in the house, a pipe moved. "You don't go in," he said. "You go to the perimeter. You wait. If I need you inside, I'll signal." He held her gaze. "If I tell you to leave, you leave. No argument." "Agreed." "I mean it." "So do I. Let's go." They took his car. A black sedan, unremarkable, the kind of car that existed specifically to be unremarkable. And he drove without apparent speed, but covered ground in a way that suggested intimate knowledge of which streets to take and when. It was full dark by then, the city doing its night thing, and the lights moved past the window in streaks of amber and white, and Vivian sat in the passenger seat with her hands flat on her thighs and her mind running at a frequency she usually only reached in the last hour of a deal that was either going to close or detonate. "The correspondence," she said. "On the desk. Tell me now." He kept his eyes on the road. His hands on the wheel were steady. "The arrangement with Blackwell's subsidiary is a disinformation channel. I've been feeding controlled intelligence into his network for 6 weeks, letting him believe he has a source inside my operation." She looked at him. "You fabricated a back channel." "I constructed one. There's a difference." He changed lanes. "The 14 months of payments Blackwell sent your lawyer are also fabricated. He generated them. He's been planning this contingency since the summit. If the confrontation didn't stop us, discrediting you by suggesting I was working both sides would create enough doubt to stall the regulatory investigation and give him time to restructure." "How do you know what he sent Hargrove?" "Because I have someone in his communications team." "For how long?" 11 months. She sat with that. "That was on your side of the ledger." "Yes." "And you couldn't tell me because if you'd known, it would have changed how you moved in rooms with his people. You're good, Vivian. You're very good. But no one is good enough to know something that significant and have it not live somewhere in how they carry themselves." He glanced at her briefly. "You needed to be clean in Chicago. Completely clean." She looked out the window at the dark sliding past. She thought about Blackwell in Chicago, the handshake, the specific question about domestic backers. She thought about what she'd given him that night. Nothing. She'd been certain of nothing. And understood now that Luca had been certain too, because he'd arranged it that way. "The paper I read," she said. "You left it." A pause. "Yes." "Why?" Another pause, longer. "Because you deserve to ask the question, even if the timing was catastrophic." "Yes." She turned back to the road. "We're going to talk about the full picture when this is over. All of it. Every asset, every channel, every piece of intelligence you've been running that touches this operation." "Yes," he said. No qualification, no negotiation. She believed him. She noted that she believed him and also noted that belief was not the same as verification, and she would be verifying regardless. But she believed him. The Red Hook warehouse district at night was a specific kind of dark, industrial, waterfront adjacent, the streets too wide and too empty for the amount of space they occupied. The buildings were the large anonymous kind, metal and poured concrete, loading dock doors facing streets that saw trucks in the day and nothing at night. Luca pulled the car into a shadow between two buildings 3 blocks from the location and killed the engine. His phone buzzed. He read the screen. "My people are in position on the north and east sides. 2 minutes. Danielle's condition. Unharmed as of 20 minutes ago. They need her functional to use as leverage." He looked at Vivian directly. "They will keep her that way until they have what they want, or until they believe they won't get it. We have a window." "How wide?" "Narrow." He got out of the car. She got out of the car. The air smelled like salt water and diesel, and the specific emptiness of a part of the city that operated on a different schedule than the one she lived in. Her heels were wrong for this. She'd known that in the car and had not said anything because there was nothing to be done about it. She modified her stride, took the weight on the balls of her feet, managed. Luca moved differently out here than he did in houses and offices. Faster, lower, with an economy of motion that was entirely without the measured unhurriedness of his everyday self. This was another version of him. Older, she thought, more primary. The version that had existed before the studied stillness, before the legitimate businesses and the mahogany desk and the loose-leaf tea. She followed him through the shadow between buildings and did not look away from where she was placing her feet. They stopped at the corner of the Target building. A man materialized from the dark to Luca's left. Mid-30s, compact, moving with the same quality of trained efficiency. He and Luca exchanged 4 words in Italian she couldn't follow. "East entrance," Luca said to her. "There's a service door. Marco will take you there. You stay outside that door." He looked at her. The ambient light from somewhere across the water caught his face. "When I have her, I'll bring her out that exit. You'll be there. And if something goes wrong inside, Marco stays with you." "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze for a moment. Nothing goes wrong inside, he said. It wasn't bravado. It was the flat declarative of a man stating an operational requirement. Give me 12 minutes. He turned and moved toward the north face of the building without looking back. Marco walked her to the service door without speaking. He positioned himself at the corner where the wall met the adjacent structure, giving him a sight line down the approach while keeping her behind him. She stood at the door and looked at the back of his head and counted her own heartbeats because it was something to count. 6 minutes passed. On the 7th minute, she heard something from inside. Not a gunshot, something duller, and a voice that cut off fast. Then silence. On the 9th minute, Marco's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, said one word quietly that she didn't catch. On the 11th minute, the service door opened from the inside. Danielle came through first. She was upright, which was the first thing Vivian registered. Upright and moving under her own power, a split lip, her left eye beginning to swell in a way that was going to be dramatically worse by morning. She saw Vivian and made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something that collapsed the distance between them in 2 steps, and Vivian caught her by the arms and held her and felt Danielle's hands grip the back of her jacket with a force that communicated everything words would have taken too long to say. "I've got you," Vivian said. "I've got you." "There were 4 of them in there," Danielle said into her shoulder. Her voice was shaking in the specific way that voices shook when people had been holding themselves together for hours and could finally stop. They said your name and Luca's name, and they wanted me to call you, and I wouldn't. I know, you're out. You're out now." Luca came through the door behind her. He had his jacket in his hand rather than on, and his shirt was dark at the shoulder with something she didn't look at directly. He moved without apparent difficulty, but with the slightly more deliberate quality of someone managing a physical problem. She looked at the shoulder. "How bad?" "Fine." "Luca." "It's not an exit wound, it's a graze. It's fine." He said it without impatience, just fact. "We need to move. Blackwell will know within 20 minutes. Marco was already on his phone. The car appeared from around the block before she'd finished registering that he'd called it. A different car, she noted, not the one they'd come in. Someone had brought it. Someone had been positioned for the exit. She got Danielle into the back seat and got in beside her, and Luca got into the front, and the car moved, smooth and immediate, back into the anonymous dark of Red Hook heading north. Danielle was shaking. Vivian held her hand and didn't speak and let her shake because sometimes that was all there was to do. She could feel the trembling working its way out through Danielle's fingers, and she held on and looked at Luca's shoulder in the front seat, the dark stain spreading with a slowness that was almost reassuring in its modesty. "Hospital," she said. "Later. Now. After we get Danielle somewhere safe. 20 minutes. He didn't look back. "I have a doctor who comes to the house." She wanted to argue. She looked at the shoulder again, assessed what she could see, made the calculation that he was correct that it was manageable for 20 minutes, and let it go. She was a woman who made calculations rather than arguments when the facts supported it. The facts barely supported it. They took Danielle to a different address, not the West Village house somewhere in Brooklyn, a brownstone that belonged to someone Luca trusted in a way he didn't explain and she didn't ask about. A woman let them in, said nothing, showed Danielle to a room, and appeared 3 minutes later with ice and clean towels and the practiced composure of someone who had managed unexpected arrivals before. Luca and Vivian stood in the entry of the brownstone, while a doctor Vivian had never seen materialized from somewhere in the back of the house and looked at the shoulder without ceremony. "Sit," the doctor said to Luca. "In a minute." "Now," the doctor said. It was the tone of someone who had said this to this man before and understood that professional brevity was more effective than deference. Luca sat in the entry chair. Vivian stood 3 feet away and watched the doctor work and felt the adrenaline beginning its slow metabolic exit from her system. The specific crash that came after extreme focus when the requiring event was over and the body started collecting on its debt. Her feet hurt. Her hands were cold. She was still in the black dress from the summit, which felt like an artifact from a different timeline. "The document Blackwell sent Hargrove," she said. The doctor was cutting away the shoulder of Luca's shirt. Luca looked at her with the focused attention he defaulted to, undiminished by the evident pain he was not displaying. Fabricated, he said. I can prove it. The wire transfer records reference account numbers that didn't exist in the formats they're using until 8 months ago. The dates predate the format. Hargrove can verify that. Yes, call her. She stepped away and called Hargrove. It was 11:30 at night, and Hargrove answered on the fourth ring with the voice of a woman who had been awake and waiting. Vivian told her the account format discrepancy. Heard the keys moving on a keyboard within 30 seconds. Give me an hour, Hargrove said. I'll call you back. She ended the call, came back to the entry. The doctor was working with focused efficiency, and Luca was watching Vivian with an expression that had dropped whatever remaining layers of management he kept in place in occupied rooms and was simply, directly, watching her. I need to tell you something, he said. Your doctor is working on you. I'm aware. He didn't look at the doctor, kept his eyes on her. I built this operation to destroy Victor Blackwell. That has always been true. The 3 people who died, that has always been true. Nothing I've told you about the objective was a lie. I know. But I didn't. He stopped. The doctor did something that required him to stop for a different reason. His jaw tightened. He breathed out. I didn't anticipate you, he said when he could. That is not a line. That is a factual statement about a failure in my original planning. She looked at him. I planned for a competent operator, he said. I found someone I could not reduce to that category somewhere around the 3rd week, which complicated the operation significantly. His eyes stayed on her. It also meant that every time there was a choice between giving you full information and protecting the operation, I went with the operation, and I was wrong to. The entry was very quiet. The doctor was rapping the shoulder with the brisk movements of someone finishing a task. Vivian stood in the middle of the floor in her summit dress, with her ruined heels and her cold hands, and looked at the most controlled man she'd ever met, saying something that had clearly cost him something to assemble into words. That's not a complete confession, she said. No, but it's a start. A pause. The rest? Whatever you want to know, whatever you want to see, after tonight, everything. Everything, she said. I mean that. I know you do. The doctor finished, taped, stood, said something to Luca in a language Vivian didn't speak, received a nod, and left the room with the same quiet efficiency with which she'd arrived. Luca stood up, rolled what remained of his sleeve, looked at her with the exhaustion she'd never seen on his face before. Not physical exhaustion, something older than that. Blackwell, he said. He won't stop here. Danielle was the opening move because she was accessible. The next move is harder. He doesn't have anything left that reaches me, Vivian said. Not after tonight. He tried the Hargrove documents. They're fabricated. He tried the kidnap play. It failed. The regulatory investigation is accelerating. The merger is in formal review. Oh, she straightened. He's running out of road. Desperate men are dangerous. I know, but we're not being passive about his desperation. She looked at him directly. I want to end this. Completely. Not the merger. That's already moving. I want Blackwell's entire structure exposed. Federal level. Everything your contact in his communications team has. Luca looked at her. It means burning assets, he said carefully. Intelligence channels I've spent years building. Leverage that has value beyond this operation. I know. Once it's in federal hands, I lose control of what gets examined. I know that too. He was quiet. You said you wanted to build something clean, she said. You said Phoenix Holdings was the legitimate structure, the legal empire. She held his gaze. This is what that costs. If you mean it. A long silence. She watched him make a decision, watched the actual process of it, visible in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes moved slightly off hers and then back, like a man looking at the full scope of a thing he's about to put down. All right, he said. All of it. All of it. She exhaled. Once, completely, and then gathered herself back. I need a laptop, and Hargrove needs to be looped in tonight, regardless of the hour. She paused. And I need to check on Danielle. She found Danielle in the room upstairs, sitting on the edge of a bed with an ice pack held to her eye and a cup of something hot in her other hand, looking like a woman who had survived something and was still in the process of determining how she felt about it. Danielle looked up when Vivian came in. "Is it done?" she said. "Not yet. Getting there." The shoulder. "He's fine." Danielle looked at her with the specific attention of 15 years of friendship. The look that went past whatever Vivian's face was doing and found the thing underneath. "You believed him. About the documents." "I verified. And yes. And the rest of it. The parts you told me about in the car from Chicago." Vivian sat on the edge of the bed beside her. "Working on it." Danielle was quiet for a moment. Then, "He came in there himself. He didn't send people. I mean, he sent people too, but he came himself." She looked at the ice pack. "I know what you're going to say." "I'm not going to say anything." "You're going to say that's operational, that it was the most efficient approach." Vivian looked at her hands. "Maybe." "Viv, I know. You know." "I said I know, Danny." Danielle looked at her for another moment. Then she leaned back against the headboard and closed her eyes and said, "Go do what you need to do. I'm going to be fine." Vivian went back downstairs. Luca was in the brownstone small study. She hadn't seen it on the way in, but he'd found it, sitting at the desk with a phone in one hand and what she recognized as a coordination call underway. His voice low and specific, issuing instructions she couldn't fully follow, but whose shape she understood. People being moved, documentation being pulled, channels being opened. She sat in the chair across from him, the way she sat in the chair across from him in the West Village study, and waited. He ended the call. Set the phone down. "The federal contact is active," he said. "Hargrove will receive a package before morning. Financial records from Blackwell's operation covering 8 years. The trafficking network's use of Titan Nexus infrastructure. The 2017 restructuring documents with the original ownership records attached." "Your name is in those documents." "Yes." He said it without hesitation. "My original stake, the legitimate one, and its removal." He looked at her. "My attorneys will manage the exposure. It won't be comfortable, but it won't be fatal." Is that a professional opinion or a hopeful one? The edge of his mouth moved, barely, and not quite into a smile, but into the territory adjacent to one. "Professional," he said. "Mostly." She looked at him in the small room with its borrowed desk and its lamp throwing a circle of yellow light. This man who had planned around her and then found himself unable to reduce her to a plan, and she thought about everything between the gate and the rain and this moment. All the negotiations and the compressed weeks and the summit and Danielle's split lip and the shoulder and the things he'd said in the entry with someone else's blood drying on his shirt. "When this is over," she said. "When this is over," he agreed, as if she'd completed the sentence. She hadn't, but she let it stand. Her phone buzzed. Hargrove. She picked up, listened. The account format discrepancy confirmed. The documents Blackwell sent were fabricated, created in the last 72 hours with forensically identifiable signatures that Hargrove's firm's forensic accountant had just spent the last 90 minutes documenting. They had it in writing. They had it time-stamped. It was over as a credibility threat. She ended the call and looked at Luca. "The documents are confirmed fabricated," she said. He nodded once. He already knew, or had expected it. But he let her tell him. "Blackwell will know by morning that the Red Hook play failed," she said. "He'll know the documents didn't hold. He'll know the federal contact is activated." She set her phone on the desk between them. "He's going to move. Tonight or tomorrow morning, before anything can be formally filed. He's going to try to get to you directly." "Yes. Is that a concern?" He looked at her steadily. "Victor Blackwell coming for me directly is the least dangerous version of this that exists." He said it without ego, without performance, just calibration. The dangerous version was tonight, taking someone outside the operation. She understood. Danielle was dangerous because she was unexpected and soft and outside any calculation Luca had built his protection around. Victor Blackwell coming for Luca Moretti directly was a different kind of problem, a known kind, a kind Luca had been navigating for 20 years. "I'm staying tonight," she said. He looked at her. Not because of it. She stopped, breathed, started over. Because Danielle shouldn't be moved tonight and I'm not leaving her. And because we need to be in the same location when Hargrove calls with the confirmation package and when the federal contact moves on it. She looked at him steadily. Those are operational reasons. Yes, he said. They are. A beat. There's also, she said, and then stopped again because the other thing didn't have operational language, and she was a woman who had learned to reach for operational language when she didn't trust the other kind. Luca waited. He was very good at waiting. There's also the fact that I've been in this for 6 months and I don't fully know what it's made of yet, she said. What we are. What this is. And I think both of us have been careful about not knowing because knowing changes the operating parameters. It does, he said. But the parameters are already changed, she said, whether we've named it or not. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the brownstone's pipes moved with the specific voice of old houses settling into night. Somewhere upstairs, Danielle shifted on the borrowed bed. Yes, Luca said. They are. She held his gaze. When this is over, she said again. When this is over, he said, and this time it wasn't an agreement so much as a promise. And promises from men like Luca Moretti were rare enough and specific enough that she understood the weight of it. Her phone rang. Not Hargrove. Not a number she recognized. She frowned at the screen and answered because at this point in this night she was not going to ignore unknown callers. Miss Hale. The voice was smooth, accented faintly with something southern that had been mostly trained out of it. She knew it instantly. I believe we have some things to discuss. Victor Blackwell. Calling from a number she'd never had. Her hand tightened on the phone. She looked at Luca across the desk. He saw her expression and went very still. Mr. Blackwell? She said. Her voice came out level, which was a small private victory. It's late. It is, he agreed. I apologize for the hour. I want you to know that I deeply regret the incident this evening involving your friend. That was handled with a lack of subtlety that I find embarrassing. I imagine it is embarrassing, she said, given that it failed. A brief pause. Yes, I owe you credit for that. His voice was friendly the way a locked door was friendly, the appearance of ease with something firm and impassable beneath. I'm calling because I think we've been approaching this situation in ways that are unnecessary for both of us. You're a talented woman. Phoenix Holdings is impressive, and I understand now that Moretti's position is more advanced than I'd estimated. What do you want? A conversation, he said. In person. Tomorrow morning. Just the two of us. A pause. I think we might find that we have more in common than our current arrangement suggests. Vivian looked at Luca. He was watching her with absolute attention, reading the call from her side of it with the precision of long practice. She thought about what Blackwell was doing, the pivot from force to negotiation, the friendly voice, the flattery. She thought about a man who was running out of road and knew it and was trying to find one more door. She thought about Luca saying desperate men are dangerous. Where? She said. I'll send you an address, Blackwell said. 8 a.m. Come alone. A pause that lasted the exact length required to be meaningful. And Ms. Hale, don't bring Moretti. This conversation isn't for him. The line went dead. She held the phone in her hand and looked at it, and then looked at Luca, and the room between them was full of everything that was still unresolved, and everything that was about to happen, and the 8 hours that remained before 8 a.m., and the address that was already appearing on her screen. He wants a meeting, she said. Tomorrow. Alone. Luca's face had gone to the flat, controlled surface she'd seen only in moments of genuine danger. No. I'm going. Vivian? He's desperate, and he's pivoting, and that means he's going to tell me something true because desperate people negotiate with information. She set the phone on the desk. It's the same logic as Chicago. I go in clean. I come out with intelligence. She paused. And this time, you know everything I know before I walk through the door. He stood up. His shoulder, bandaged under the ruined shirt, pulled with the movement. She saw the flicker of it across his face. If he decides to stop negotiating mid-conversation, Then that becomes a different problem, and we manage it. She stood too. They were closer than they usually were, the desk between them reduced to inches. I know what I'm doing. I know you do, he said. That's not what concerns me. She looked at him. He looked back. In the borrowed light of the borrowed study in the borrowed brownstone, with the night moving toward morning and Blackwell's address glowing on her phone screen, the thing neither of them had named all these months was present in the room with them as clearly and specifically as a third person. 8 hours, she said. 8 hours, he said. She picked up the phone, started making calls. Outside, the city continued its patient, indifferent dark, and somewhere across the water, Victor Blackwell sat in whatever room men like him occupied when they were down to their last play, calculating what he had left to offer and what he had left to threaten, not knowing that the woman he was planning to negotiate with in 8 hours had already stopped being someone's instrument and had become, quietly and entirely, the most dangerous person in the room before anyone walked through the door. She didn't sleep. She sat in the brownstone's kitchen after the calls were done, and Luca had finally agreed to rest the shoulder, and she drank bad coffee from a machine that belonged to someone else, and watched the clock on the wall move from 2 a.m. to 3 to 4, with the slow, indifferent patience of clocks everywhere. The house was quiet. Danielle was sleeping. She'd checked twice, standing in the doorway long enough to confirm the rhythm of breathing, the relative stillness of a body finally released from sustained fear. Luca's doctor had left at midnight. Marco and whoever else had materialized and dematerialized through the evening had gone wherever people like them went between operations. It was just her and the coffee and the address on her phone screen. She thought about the 8 a.m. meeting with the precision she applied to every negotiation she'd ever walked into. Not the emotion of it, not the fear, but the structure. What Blackwell had. What she had. What he wanted, and what she was willing to give, and what she was never going to give, regardless of what he said, or threatened, or offered. She ran it 4 times in her head, different scenarios, different opening moves from his side, mapping her responses. By 5 a.m., she had what she needed. At 5:30, Luca appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd changed his shirt, one of the borrowed ones from wherever the brownstone kept such things, and his shoulder moved with a careful limitation he was visibly not acknowledging. He looked at her, at the coffee, at the clock. He poured himself a cup and sat across from her without speaking. They sat like that for 10 minutes. It was not uncomfortable. That was the thing she noticed, that the silence between them had a quality she hadn't experienced with many people. The quality of 2 minds occupying the same space without the social tax of filling it. Tell me the scenario you're most worried about, he said finally. He has something we don't know about, she said. Some asset or leverage that didn't surface in anything your contact pulled. He calls it in the room, and it's real, and it changes the calculation. What kind of asset? Evidence that directly ties Phoenix to your non-legitimate interests, not the fabricated Hargrove documents. Something real that I don't know about because it's on your side of the ledger. He held her gaze. There's nothing. You're certain. I'm certain. He set his cup down. Phoenix is clean, Vivian. I built it to be clean specifically because I knew there would come a moment where it had to survive scrutiny. That was always the design. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I intended to hand it to someone who deserved to run something legitimate, someone who hadn't spent their life operating in the dark. He looked at the table. A rare thing, Luca Moretti looking away from a conversation rather than through it. I didn't know who that person was when I started building it. I knew the function before I knew the person. She held that. Let it sit. And then you found a woman knocking on your gate in the rain, she said. And then I found a woman knocking on my gate in the rain, he said, who had built a $900 million company and had it taken from her by a man who understood neither its value nor hers, and who walked into my study and drank my tea and in the space of 40 minutes demonstrated more strategic intelligence than I had encountered in 20 years of operating in rooms where strategic intelligence was the primary currency. She looked at him directly. That's the most words you've said at one time. Something crossed his face that she had never seen before. Brief, unguarded, gone before she could fully catalog it. But it was warm. Actually warm, not the controlled warmth of a man managing his effect on a room, the real thing. "Go to the meeting," he said. "I'll have 2 people within range, not visible, not actionable, unless you signal. You have full operational autonomy in that room." "I know. Come back." "I intend to." She stood up. He stood up. They were in the kitchen at 5:40 a.m. in borrowed space with cold coffee and a day that was already moving toward them faster than either of them had controlled. And she looked at him for a moment with the specific attention she'd been withholding for months because withholding it had felt safer than the alternative. She reached out and put her hand briefly against his jaw. Just that, just the contact, the specific warmth of it. His eyes went very still. "When this is over," she said, and this time she didn't stop. He turned his head slightly, just enough, and pressed his lips to her palm. A single point of contact, brief, deliberate, carrying the weight of everything that had been accumulating since a gate opened in the rain. "When this is over," he said against her hand. She lowered her arm, picked up her phone, walked to the door. The address Blackwell had sent was a private dining room in a hotel in Midtown, the old money kind of hotel, marble and brass, and a stillness in the corridors that suggested it had seen everything twice already and was no longer impressed. She arrived at 7:58. She was shown upstairs by a person whose function she couldn't immediately determine, and into a room with a single table, 2 chairs, and Victor Blackwell already seated with coffee and the particular composure of a man who had decided how this was going to go. He stood when she entered, extended his hand. She shook it. They sat. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You have something to tell me," she said. "Tell me." He looked at her with the assessment she'd felt in Chicago, recalibrated now. Something sharper in it, less confident. He'd had a bad night, the Red Hook failure, the Hargrove documents collapsing, the federal contact activating. She could see the specific fatigue of a man who'd spent hours managing damage in the small hours and hadn't managed all of it. "I want to offer you the merger," he said. She blinked. "Once. Controlled." "Explain." "Not the cross-dynamic structure. That's compromised beyond recovery. Adrian Cross is finished, we both know that." He turned his coffee cup on its saucer. "A tell," she filed. "I'm offering Phoenix Holdings a position in the restructured entity that emerges after the merger is formally withdrawn. A significant position, infrastructure access, routing network, the full Asia-Pacific apparatus that you originally built." He looked at her. "Under your operational leadership." She looked back at him. "You're offering me a role in Titan Nexus," she said, "in the restructured entity, which is Titan Nexus." He didn't blink. "With new governance, new oversight, the aspects of the previous structure that created regulatory complications would be removed. The aspects," she said slowly, "that moved narcotics and trafficking proceeds through freight infrastructure." His face did something careful. Historical operational irregularities that would be fully addressed in the restructuring. "Addressed," she said. "Like the 3 people who died in 2017 were addressed." The room got colder. She felt it. The temperature change that happened when a conversation moved from negotiation into something else. Blackwell's composure held, but it was holding with effort now, visible at the edges. "Ms. Hale," he said, "I'm offering you something significant." "I know what you're offering," she said. "You're offering me a position inside your network in exchange for pulling back the federal package and removing Luca Moretti's resources from the field. You're offering me the appearance of legitimacy while the underlying structure continues operating the way it's always operated, with better cover because my name is on the front of it." She picked up her coffee, drank, set it down. "And you're offering it because you've run out of every other option, and this is the door you have left." He looked at her for a long moment. The friendly manner was gone now, not replaced by hostility, but by something more direct. The actual man, finally, without the performance. "What do you want?" he said. "Everything your communications contact has been holding," she said. The complete financial record of Titan Nexus's criminal operations for the last 9 years, the documentation of the 2017 restructuring fraud, the names of the political contacts who kept the federal antitrust review from progressing. She looked at him. All of it, voluntarily submitted to federal investigators, with your full cooperation. He stared at her. You're asking me to... I'm telling you what the only option left is, she said. The federal package is already being prepared. It goes in today whether you cooperate or not. The question is whether you cooperate and have a conversation with prosecutors about the degree of your culpability, or whether you don't cooperate and the conversation is considerably shorter and the outcome is considerably more final. You have no authority to offer prosecutorial... I have Hargrove, she said, who has been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office since 6 o'clock this morning. The cooperation framework is already drafted. She held his gaze. I'm not offering you freedom, Mr. Blackwell. I'm offering you the version of this where you have a conversation rather than just a verdict. The silence that followed was the longest of the meeting. She sat in it without moving. She was aware of her own heartbeat, not racing, but present, the physical register of a moment that was resolving in real time. Blackwell looked at the table, at his coffee, at his own hands. The 3 in 2017, he said quietly. It was the first thing he'd said that didn't have a strategy underneath it. That was Carver, my head of security at the time. I authorized containment. I didn't... He stopped. You authorized containment, she said, and 3 people died. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either, and the silence was its own answer, shaped like a man who had spent 9 years not looking directly at a thing and was now being required to look. I'll need to speak to my attorneys, he said finally. You have until noon, she said. She stood. After that, the package goes in without the cooperation framework. She picked up her bag. I'm sorry for the 3 people, she said. Not to you, to whoever they were. She walked out. She was in the car, not Luca's, her own, a car service she'd arranged herself, when her phone rang. Hargrove. He called, Hargrove said. 3 minutes ago. His attorney called, technically. They want the cooperation framework. Vivian closed her eyes. Just for a second, let the exhale come. Process it, she said, already moving. A pause. Vivian, this is an extraordinary outcome. Not yet, she said. Call me when the federal filing is confirmed. She went back to the brownstone. Luca was at the kitchen table when she came in, phone down, waiting. He looked at her face and read it the way he read everything, completely, accurately, in about 2 seconds. He took the cooperation framework, she said. Luca said nothing for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup and drank what was in it and set it back down with a small, precise movement that she had learned to recognize as the closest he got to visible relief. The federal filing, he said. Hargrove is moving it now. My contact's documentation package. Needs to go to Hargrove's office by 10. Can you get it there? Yes. Then we're in the final hour, she said. She sat down across from him. Her legs were tired. The heels had been wrong for 3 separate impossible situations in the last 12 hours, and she was done with them. She took them off under the table and felt the cold floor under her feet and breathed. Your exposure, she said. The original stake, the 2017 records. How bad? My attorney spoke with the U.S. Attorney's Office at 7 a.m., he said. Given the nature of the cooperation and the documentation I'm providing, the characterization of my original position is as a defrauded legitimate investor rather than a knowing participant. He looked at her. It's not a clean outcome. There will be proceedings. My name will be in documents that are part of a federal case. But the criminal exposure is manageable. He paused. The cost is everything I built as leverage over the last 14 months. The intelligence channels, the financial positions, the political contacts I activated to slow the regulatory review. All of it goes into the federal record. I know, she said. You said you would. I did. He looked at her steadily. I said it because you asked me to, and because... He stopped, started again. Because it was right. Not strategically, just right. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the morning light coming through the brownstone small window, This man who had built a criminal empire and a legitimate one in parallel for 20 years and was now burning the first to properly fund the second. And she thought about how long it had been since she'd been in a room with someone whose reasons she actually believed. "We need to talk about Phoenix," she said. "Yes. Specifically, we need to talk about my ownership structure and the board composition in light of the federal case. Even with your exposure managed, having your name associated with Phoenix during an active federal proceeding creates compliance risk that—" "I'll step back from the board," he said. She blinked. "I wasn't—" "You were getting there." He wasn't wrong. "I'll step back from the board effective immediately. Purely advisory capacity, no formal governance role until the proceedings are resolved." He looked at her. "Phoenix should stand on its own. It was built to. You were built to run it." She was quiet for a moment. "You understand," she said carefully, "that stepping back from the board changes the nature of our operating agreement significantly." "I understand. It also means I have full autonomous authority over the company." "That was always the intent," he said. "The board structure was protective cover for the early period. You don't need it anymore." She looked at him for a long time. "You're giving it to me," she said. "The whole thing." "I'm removing myself from a formal governance role," he said precisely. "The company was always yours in the ways that matter." She held his gaze. Something in her chest moved. Not the sharp thing she'd felt standing outside the Cross Dynamics building in the rain. Not the cold thing she'd felt reading Blackwell's fabricated documents in Hargrove's office. Something quieter than both of those. Something that felt cautiously and with full awareness of its own fragility, like ground. "All right," she said. Her phone buzzed. Hargrove. Federal filing confirmed, cooperation framework signed, Blackwell's attorney on record. It was 9:47 a.m. She put the phone on the table between them. "It's done," she said. Luca looked at the phone, looked at her. "Yes," he said. The next weeks were the kind that didn't feel like time so much as sediment, things settling out of suspension, finding their levels, the water slowly clearing after everything that had been churned up in the storm. The federal case opened formally and consumed Victor Blackwell with the methodical unhurriedness of federal processes everywhere, subpoenas and document requests, and the specific institutional weight of an investigation that had enough material to work with and wasn't in a hurry. Titan Nexus's board scattered. 3 members resigned before the end of the first week. 2 more by the second. The political contacts Blackwell had maintained folded with a speed that suggested they'd been waiting for an exit for some time. Adrian Cross filed for corporate bankruptcy protection on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the summit. She heard about it from a financial news alert on her phone. She read the headline. Read it again. Then she put the phone down and went back to the quarterly projections she'd been reviewing and finished them. Danielle called that evening. "Did you see?" Danielle said. "Yes." "How do you feel?" Vivian thought about it honestly. "Like I finished something," she said. "Not like I won something. Finished." "Is there a difference?" "Yes," she said. "Winning implies someone on the other side was a worthy opponent. Finishing just means the thing is done." A pause. "He called me, Adrian, last week." Vivian's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "What did he want?" "He wanted me to tell you he was sorry. He said he'd been thinking about what he did, how he did it, the board meeting, the accounts." Danielle's voice was careful. "He wanted to know if you'd speak to him." Vivian sat with that. She thought about 10 years, about Singapore, about the navy tie with the gold stripe that she hadn't bought. She thought about a man who had spent 6 weeks preparing her removal while she was working for him, and who was now bankrupt and disgraced and had apparently arrived at the conclusion that remorse, delivered through a mutual friend, was worth something. "No," she said. Not with heat, just flatly, clearly, in the way of a door closing from the inside. "Okay," Danielle said. "Tell him I hope he finds something useful to do with himself." "I'll tell him that." A pause. "Are you good, Viv? Really?" "I'm better than good," she said. "I'll tell you about it when I see you." She went back to the projections. Phoenix Holdings had closed 3 legitimate infrastructure deals in the 6 weeks since the summit, moved by the credibility of the public moment rather than impeded by it. 2 more were in late-stage negotiation. The routing technology division, her technology, the system she'd built at Cross Dynamics and was now rebuilding with proper ownership, was attracting attention from institutional partners who had, 3 months ago, not known Phoenix existed. Hargrove called on a Thursday to report that the Cross Dynamics asset liquidation was proceeding and that Phoenix Holdings was positioned as the primary acquirer for the logistics and routing infrastructure. It would close by end of month. The technology was coming home. She stood at the window of the Phoenix offices when Hargrove told her that, and looked at the city below. Tribeca at midday, deliveries and pedestrians, and the ordinary noise of commerce moving through streets she'd spent 20 years learning, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long that it took her a moment to name it. It was hers. The work, the company, the thing she'd built twice now. It was hers in a way it had never quite been the first time, because this time there was no Adrian beside her, to whom she was the silent engine, no board that saw her role as the internal mechanism while the public face belonged to someone else. This time, her name was on the door in every sense. She went to the house that evening. The West Village house with its gate and its stone floors and its smell of wood smoke that she'd walked into in the rain 9 months ago without knowing what she was walking into. The gate code was still the same. He'd offered to change it after the federal case opened, some security protocol thought, and she'd said don't, which was a conversation that had communicated several things at once without either of them commenting on it. Luca was on the back terrace she'd never been invited into and had never thought to question. The door was open. She found him there in the evening cold, a jacket on this time, a glass of something amber on the table beside the chair. He looked up when she came out. She sat in the other chair. He poured her a glass from the bottle on the table without asking. She accepted it. The garden was small and private, high walls, a stone path, something that might be a rose bush in one corner, dormant now. The kind of space a person made for themselves that no one else saw. The kind of space that said something about who a person was when they weren't performing any version of themselves for any room. The asset acquisition closes end of month, she said. I know, Hargrove CC'd me on the confirmation. Old habit. I asked her to, he said. A pause. I can ask her to stop. No, she said. It's fine. They sat for a moment. The city hummed at its perpetual ambient frequency beyond the walls. The federal proceedings, plus, she said. Your attorney. Timeline. 6 to 9 months for the full record to be in process. My exposure is limited to the defrauded investor characterization, as expected. There will be a deposition, possibly 2. He looked at his glass. My name will be in print more than I prefer for a while. You'll survive it. Yes. The non-legitimate side, she said. The rest of the ledger. He was quiet for a moment. This was the conversation they hadn't finished in the brownstone study, the one she'd been building towards since she'd put her hand against his face at 5:30 in the morning. I've been in the process of unwinding it for 8 months, he said. The decision preceded you, technically, but you... He stopped, chose words with the care he applied to every communication that mattered. You made the destination clearer. She looked at him. What does unwinding it look like? Slow, he said. Careful. In a way that doesn't create instability in the structures that exist or danger for the people involved. 6 months more, possibly a year. He met her eyes. After which I'm a man with legitimate shipping interests and a history that's complicated and documented and no longer operational. She held his gaze. Can you do it? Actually, not as a plan, as a reality. He looked at her for a long time. I've been doing it, he said. The question was always whether there was a reason compelling enough to finish it. The evening cold settled around them both. She held her glass and thought about compelling reasons and the specific weight of a word like that, spoken by a man who had built his entire life on the principle that every decision had a strategic return and was apparently arriving, late and with some visible difficulty, at the understanding that some returns didn't fit in the original accounting. I have a question, she said. Yes. The night I knocked on the gate. I've assumed for 9 months that it was chance. Wrong street, wrong corner. But I've had time to think about it, and I keep coming back to the location." She looked at him steadily. "The house is not on the way from the Cross Dynamics building to anywhere. It's not on any logical walking route from Midtown to anywhere I would have been going. I would have had to have made specific wrong turns that together compound into a very unusual coincidence." Luca was very still. "Did you know I was coming?" she said. The garden was quiet. A sound from somewhere beyond the walls. A taxi, a voice, and then quiet again. "I knew you had left the Cross Dynamics building," he said. "I had people watching Adrian's interests at that point. You appeared on a surveillance feed I was monitoring. I watched you walk for several hours." She breathed. And when it became clear that you had nowhere to go and no resources, and were walking into a storm that was going to become a medical situation if you stayed in it long enough." He stopped. Something moved across his face. "I had someone positioned at the corner 2 blocks north, who walked ahead of you and turned the wrong direction, and you followed the foot traffic." He held her gaze. "The gate was already open when you arrived. I had turned on the lights on the ground floor." She sat with this. 9 months. She'd walked into what she thought was a wrong door, and it had been, in the precise and careful way of everything Luca Moretti did, a right door made to look like an accident. She waited for the anger. She looked for it, checked for it, found it somewhere beneath the surface, and examined it honestly. It was smaller than she expected. "Why?" she said. "You had 14 months of position building already in place. You had the debt, the intelligence, the regulatory channels. You didn't need me to appear to you as a coincidence. You could have approached me through any number of—" "Because I needed to know what you were before I made the approach," he said. "Not what your resume said, not what the surveillance record said, what you actually were when you had nothing." His voice was quiet. "A person under genuine duress with no audience and no performance requirement is an honest data point in a way that a professional contact in a structured approach isn't." She looked at him. "And what was I?" "Remarkable," he said, without qualification. Without the careful management of affect she'd come to expect from him. Just the word, clean and direct, in the cold garden in the evening. She was quiet for a moment. "I should be furious," she said. "You have every right to be." "I'm deciding not to be," she said. "Not because what you did was acceptable. It wasn't. But because I've spent 9 months watching you make decisions, and the decisions you made with me in them were, on balance, more honest than the decisions most people have made about me in my entire adult life." She looked at him. "That's a low bar, and I know it." "It is," he agreed. "But it's also true." She picked up her glass. "Don't do it again." "No," he said. "Any of it. The management, the controlled information, the decisions about what I need to know and when." "No," he said again. And she believed him the way she'd believed him in the brownstone study. Not blindly, not completely, but in the specific and honest way of a person who had done the full accounting and found the balance workable. They sat in the garden as the dark came fully down, and the city settled into its night register, and the conversation moved off the difficult terrain and into something easier. The Phoenix acquisition, the board appointments she was considering, a shipping contract in the Pacific Northwest that she'd been reviewing. The ordinary material of a working life, moving through the space between them with the comfort of long practice. She didn't leave that night. That was new. She stayed, and in the morning she made coffee from the machine in the kitchen that she knew as well as her own by now. And Luca came in at 7, and they stood at the counter drinking coffee and looking at the city through the kitchen window, and the silence between them had the quality she'd noticed from the beginning. The quality of 2 minds that didn't need to fill space to inhabit it. 1 year later, she stood in front of a mirror in a hotel suite getting ready for the Meridian Gala. The New York business event, the one that mattered, the one that had seemed like a different planet a year ago when she'd been walking in the rain with a dead phone and $400. Phoenix Holdings had been invited as a principal sponsor. Her name was on the invitation in the second line. Danielle sat behind her on the bed, fully recovered, the split lip long-healed, looking at her phone with one eye and Vivian with the other. "He's going to be there," Danielle said. "I know." Adrian, I know. And you're fine. I'm fine. She adjusted the earring. I was fine 6 months ago. I'm better than fine now. I've simply had other things to think about. Danielle made a sound that communicated a full paragraph in the compressed language of long friendship. Don't, Vivian said. I didn't say anything. You were about to say something about Luca. I was going to say he looks good in a suit, which is an objective observation. Vivian looked at her in the mirror. Danielle looked back with the expression of a woman exercising significant restraint. He does look good in a suit, Vivian allowed. Danielle pressed her lips together, said nothing. Vivian turned back to the mirror and finished what she was doing. Luca was waiting at the hotel lobby when they came down. Dark suit. The good one she'd never seen before the summit night. He looked at her when she came off the elevator with the expression she'd finally, fully cataloged over these months. Not the professional assessment, not the controlled read of a room. The one that appeared when she walked toward him, and that he no longer made any effort to contain. Ready, he said. Yes. They walked into the gala together, and the room did the thing rooms did when they entered them now. A subtle recalibration, the awareness moving through the assembled crowd like current through water. Phoenix Holdings. Vivian Hale. Luca Moretti, whose name had been in federal filings and financial headlines for 6 months, and who moved through the scrutiny with the same undisturbed quality he moved through everything. They were 40 feet into the room when she saw Adrian. He was near the bar. Older looking than when she'd seen him at the summit, the specific aging that happened to men when the infrastructure of status and money and other people's labor holding them up was removed and they had to carry their own weight for the first time. He saw her. He saw Luca. His face moved through several things quickly. He crossed toward her. She watched him come and felt nothing in particular. Not the cold of the day in the boardroom, not the hot tearing of the rain outside the building. Nothing. The space where he'd taken up residence in her life for 10 years was occupied by something else now, something larger and more interesting, and there was simply no room left. Vivian, he said. He stopped a few feet away. He was looking at her the way people looked at things they'd discarded, and then found displayed in a better light somewhere else. You look... Adrian, she said. He glanced at Luca. Luca looked back at him with the specific quality of a man who does not find another man's discomfort particularly significant. I've been wanting to reach out, Adrian said. I know, Danielle, I know my message didn't... I wanted to say personally that I understand what I did, the way I handled it, the accounts, the board meeting. He looked at her. His eyes were earnest in the way of a man who had reached the stage of his own story where sincerity seemed like the remaining option. I was wrong, Vivian, completely wrong. And I've had a lot of time to think about what I cost you and what I... Adrian, she said again, quietly, without edge. I know. He blinked. I know you were wrong, she said, and I believe it cost you something to get there. That's yours. She looked at him with the calm of a woman who had moved far enough away from a thing to see it clearly without being in it. I don't need the apology, not because I'm still angry. I'm not. But because the conversation I would have needed to have with you was the one in the boardroom before you had the papers ready, and that conversation never happened, so this one doesn't do the same work. He was quiet. I hope you find something, she said. Genuinely. Something that belongs to you rather than something you took. She paused. Take care of yourself. She turned. Luca was beside her. They moved together further into the room, and she didn't look back, and the man behind her didn't call after her, and the distance between them grew to the size it was always going to be, the size of everything she'd built that he'd never be able to see all the way to the edges of. Later that evening, out on the gala's terrace with the city spread below them and the party noise muffled through the glass doors, Luca stood beside her and looked at the skyline, and she looked at it too, and the silence between them had the garden quality, the weight and ease of something that had taken a long time to earn. The Pacific Northwest contract, she said, closes Friday. And the Manila routing deal. Next week? Phoenix's Q4 projections are going to be remarkable. Yes, he said. They are. She looked at the city. All of it. The lights and the distance, and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of 10 million people pursuing 10 million different versions of what they thought would make them whole. She'd spent a year pursuing a version of her own, walking through a wrong door and finding, instead of ruin, something she hadn't known to plan for. "I want to expand the board," she said. "2 independent members with no connection to either of our histories. Clean." "Good," he said. "And I want to take Phoenix public, not this year, next. Give the federal proceedings time to settle. But that's the direction." "I agree with all of it," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You're not going to negotiate on Phoenix's operational direction?" He looked at her. "No, that's yours. It was always going to be yours." The city lights moved in his eyes. "I'll fight you on everything else." "Everything else," she said. "Yes," he said, "everything else." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the view and let the night hold them both, this man and this woman, and the city below them that didn't know their names except on financial filings and federal documents, and the kind of industry coverage that would be archived and forgotten by next quarter. They didn't need the city to know. They knew. She reached out, found his hand at his side, her fingers against his. No performance, no strategy, no operational calculation, just the specific warmth of a hand that had opened a gate in the rain and made tea and burned 20 years of leverage to make sure she couldn't be used as a weapon by anyone, including himself. His hand closed around hers. The city went on below them. The gala went on behind the glass. Somewhere in the logistics infrastructure of the eastern seaboard, shipping moved through routes she had designed and redesigned and reclaimed, carrying ordinary freight for ordinary purposes, doing what she'd built it to do. She stood in the cold air on the terrace of the most prestigious gala in New York, with her company and her name and her work restored and expanded beyond what she'd had before. And she looked at the lights, and she breathed, and she was not someone's instrument or someone's strategy or someone's discarded wife standing in the rain with a dead phone and $400 in an account someone else had drained. She was Vivian Hale. She had built something twice. She had walked through fire to get it back, and through something more complicated and more consuming than fire to understand what she wanted it for. And beside her, a man who had spent 20 years in the dark was learning slowly, with the specific difficulty of a person unlearning a long habit, what it meant to build something you didn't have to protect from the light. The night held them both. That was enough. That was, for now and for a long time to come, more than enough.